Hey there, tonight we're uncovering how gladiators truly survived the Roman arena, not the bloody spectacle Hollywood portrays, but a world where strategy, resilience, and unexpected camaraderie were key to outlasting the sands. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. The clamor of the Roman Colosseum, the distant roar of a crowd eager for blood and spectacle, was more than just the soundtrack of ancient Rome. It was the heartbeat of an empire that thrived on power and entertainment. The origins of these gladiatorial games, however, were far removed from the grand arenas of Rome. They began in the misty rituals of the Etruscans, those enigmatic neighbors who lived just north of Rome. For the Etruscans, the spilling of blood was a sacred rite, a way to honor the spirits of the dead during funeral ceremonies. A bit grim, sure, but nothing says goodbye, quite like a good old-fashioned combat to the death rite. Rome, being Rome, saw this and thought, why not scale it up? Thus, what started as a solemn tribute became, over centuries, a full-blown public spectacle. By the time of the Roman Empire, these games had grown into elaborate events that attracted thousands, each one a chance for the ruling elite to flex their muscles and show off their wealth. And boy, did it cost a pretty penny. Organizing a single game could set you back around 1 million sesterces. For context, that's about the annual salary of 25 Roman soldiers. But hey, what's a little financial ruin when you can entertain the masses and curry favor with the plebs? But before you start picturing every gladiator as a poor, shackled slave thrown into the arena against their will, let's pump the brakes on that myth. Sure, many were slaves, but the truth is a tad more diverse. Some were criminals, sure, but others were volunteers, freemen who willingly traded in their liberty for the tantalizing chance of glory, and believe it or not, a better life. In fact, successful gladiators could earn enough to buy their freedom, and some even became celebrities in their own right, admired and fawned over by fans. Fame, fortune, and a short lifespan, gladiators were the rock stars of their day. Now, politics and gladiatorial games went together like peas and carrots. The games were not just about entertainment, they were a political tool, a way for ambitious politicians to gain popularity and influence. Julius Caesar himself was known for hosting particularly lavish games to win over the populace. He once staged a battle involving 320 pairs of gladiators, each kitted out in expensive silver armor. Talk about making an impression. It was a strategic move, a way to outshine his rivals and ensure his name echoed in the corridors of power. Economically, these games were a juggernaut. They provided jobs, from trainers and armorers to vendors selling food and trinkets to the spectators. The construction of a venue like the Colosseum itself was a massive employment project, involving thousands of workers over nearly a decade. The games also helped circulate wealth, albeit in a rather grisly fashion. The more a gladiator fought and won, the more they earned, not just in coin, but in the potential for a new life outside the arena. And let's not forget the economic benefits for the elite who sponsored these games. They weren't just splashing out cash for the thrill of it. By funding such spectacles, they cemented their social status, won political allies, and sometimes even saw a return on investment through increased support and influence. It was a complex game of give and take, with the arena serving as the ultimate stage for power plays, both bloody and subtle. In essence, the gladiatorial games were a microcosm of Roman society itself, brutal, extravagant, politically charged, and deeply entrenched in the economic framework of the time. They were the ultimate in public relations campaigns, political maneuvers wrapped in the guise of entertainment. And for the gladiators themselves, these games were a strange blend of opportunity and peril, a chance to rise above their station or meet a grisly end. So, as you stand in the shadow of the Colosseum, remember, every cheer, every clash of swords was part of a larger story, one where survival wasn't just about skill with a weapon, but navigating the intricate web of Roman life. And speaking of the larger story, let's zoom in on the daily grind of the gladiator, the person who lived at the heart of this bloody spectacle. You might think their day-to-day life was all about dodging swords and earning roaring applause, but spoiler alert, it was a bit more mundane than that. Gladiators spent most of their time not in the arena, but in the ludus, the gladiator school. It's like Hogwarts, but for warriors, and without the magical swording hat, unless you count the brutal training as a form of swording, which, let's face it, it kind of was. Picture this, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, and already the air is thick with the sound of clashing swords and the grunts of men pushing their bodies to the limit. The training was relentless, designed to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Gladiators practiced combat techniques from various cultures, becoming masters of different weapons. They were like ancient MMA fighters, only with a much higher chance of not making it to the next season. And while we're on the topic, let's debunk another myth. Gladiators weren't all muscle-bound behemoths. In reality, they were often stocky and strong, built for endurance rather than aesthetics. Think more rugby player than bodybuilder. Now, here's a twist for you. Despite the brutal nature of their profession, gladiators actually received surprisingly good care. Their diet was rich in carbohydrates, mainly barley and beans, designed to bulk them up for stamina rather than speed. It was so effective they were nicknamed horderii, or barley men. Sure, they weren't dining on caviar and truffles, but in a world where many citizens struggled to put anything on the table, a steady diet of carbs wasn't too shabby. And let's not forget the medical care. Gladiators had access to some of the best physicians of their time, skilled in treating the wounds of battle with a level of expertise that would make any Roman soldier jealous. These doctors were the real MVPs, stitching up the stars of the show so they could live to fight another day. But before you start thinking the ludus was some ancient wellness retreat, let's not ignore the darker side of this coin. The pressure was immense. Gladiators lived with the constant threat of death hanging over their heads like a particularly sharp sword. The psychological strain was enormous. Imagine knowing that your next performance could very well be your last curtain call. The mental toll was perhaps as brutal as the physical one, compounded by the fact that every fight was not just a test of skill, but a public spectacle, with thousands of eyes watching your every move. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, these hardships, gladiators held a peculiar celebrity status in Roman society. They were the superstars of their day, complete with groupies. Some of them achieved a level of fame that transcended their grim profession. Their images were plastered on walls, their names whispered with awe and admiration. Women of the Roman elite were known to swoon over these men, and victorious gladiators could even find themselves the recipients of marriage proposals. It's a curious paradox. They were revered and reviled, celebrated yet expendable. This celebrity status, however, was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it offered a tantalizing glimpse of freedom and fortune. On the other, it underscored the harsh reality that their lives could end at any moment, a fact that no amount of adoration could change. Gladiators were commodities, valuable yet ultimately disposable. They were an integral part of the Roman economy, a bizarre blend of athlete, entertainer, and sacrifice. And for those who survived enough fights, there was the ultimate prize, the wooden sword, or rudis, a symbol of freedom, a ticket out of the arena's deadly embrace. In the end, the life of a gladiator was a strange mix of admiration and brutality, a reflection of a society that was equally fascinated and horrified by its own creation. Their existence was a testament to the Roman appetite for spectacle, a hunger that transformed men into legends at the cost of their humanity. So next time you watch a movie and see a gladiator standing triumphant in the arena, remember, behind that moment of glory lies a life of struggle, a fight for survival that went beyond the edge of a sword. Ah, the gladiators, those legendary figures who lived and died by the sword, their tales of valor and tragedy echoing through the centuries. But let's shift our gaze from the men in the arena to the arena itself, the architectural wonder that was the Roman Colosseum and its less famous but equally fascinating siblings. Picture Rome as the ancient world's version of Las Vegas, its arenas the ultimate theaters of blood-soaked drama. The Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheater if you want to impress your friends at dinner parties, was the crown jewel, a massive stone structure that could seat upwards of 50,000 spectators, all eager for a good show. Constructed between 70 and 80 AD, the Colosseum was an engineering marvel, a testament to Roman ingenuity, and let's face it, their love for a good spectacle. Standing at a towering 48 meters, 157 feet, it was as much a statement of power as it was a venue for entertainment. The seating was stratified, a physical manifestation of Rome's strict social hierarchy. The emperor and his entourage enjoyed the best seats in the house, naturally, while the plebs had to settle for the nosebleeds. Talk about a literal representation of class division. But what made the Colosseum truly spectacular wasn't just its size or design, but its versatility. This wasn't just a place for gladiatorial combat. It was a stage for every kind of entertainment the Romans could dream up. They hosted mock naval battles, with the arena floor ingeniously flooded with water. And if battles on water weren't your thing, how about exotic animal hunts? Lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, all paraded before the bloodthirsty crowd. The logistics of hosting such events were mind-boggling. Imagine the planning involved in importing wild animals from across the empire, ensuring they arrived alive and sufficiently fearsome for the crowd's amusement. Enter the editor, the master of ceremonies, the puppet master pulling the strings behind the scenes. The editor was the man, or occasionally woman, because why should men have all the fun? Responsible for curating the day's lineup with the precision of a modern-day concert promoter. They decided which gladiators fought who, what weapons were used, and even sometimes the outcome of the fights. It's like American Idol, but with a lot more at stake than a record deal. The editor's role was a blend of logistics, psychology, and sheer showmanship. They had to balance the crowd's thirst for blood with the political agendas of their patrons. A skilled editor could manipulate the crowd's emotions as deftly as a modern DJ drops the beat, creating tension and release with each clash and roar. The stakes were high. A well-orchestrated game could boost an editor's career, while a poorly managed one could see them booed out of the city or worse, politically sidelined. Now, let's get to the nitty-gritty, the gladiators themselves. You might think a gladiator was a gladiator, but that's like saying all athletes are the same. The Romans loved variety, and they had a whole cast of gladiatorial characters to keep things spicy. There were Thracians, armed with small shields and curved swords, a heavily armored murmillo, resembling ancient tanks with their fish-shaped helmets and large shields, and the Retiarius, who fought with a net and trident, looking like a fisherman who took a very wrong turn. The list goes on, each type carefully designed to challenge and entertain, their weapons and fighting styles chosen to create a balance of power and vulnerability, much like a well-crafted video game. The choice of gladiator types and their matchups was no mere coincidence. It was a calculated art designed to maximize suspense and engagement. The Romans understood that the thrill of a fight depended as much on the narrative as the action. A heavily armored murmillo facing off against a nimble Retiarius was a classic David vs. Goliath scenario, a study in contrasts that kept audiences on the edge of their stone seats. And those audiences were nothing if not demanding, their appetites whetted by a complex mix of bloodlust and a desire for spectacle. Yet, for all its grandeur and showmanship, the arena was a place of brutal reality. While the myth of the noble gladiator dying with honor might warm the heart, the truth was often grimmer. Many fights ended in death, but not all. Sometimes the crowd or the editor would spare a gladiator, especially if they put on a particularly good show. And if you think the thumbs-up/thumbs-down decision was common, think again. The whole thumb gesture thing, likely a later invention. The actual signals were probably a bit more nuanced, because of course, even in death, the Romans were all about nuance. But let's not romanticize the survival odds. While some gladiators managed to fight their way to freedom, many more met their end in the arena, their deaths a stark reminder of the empire's stark realities. It was a tough gig, and the prospect of freedom was a distant carrot dangled in front of men who had little choice but to fight. The promise of freedom, while real, was as uncertain as the whims of the crowd, a crowd whose cheers could just as easily turn to jeers, sealing a gladiator's fate in the blink of an eye. In essence, the Roman arena was a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where power, politics, and entertainment collided in a spectacle that was both awe-inspiring and utterly terrifying. It was a world where life was cheap, but the show was everything, and it was all orchestrated with a level of precision and theatricality that would make even the most seasoned Broadway producer nod in appreciation. So next time you think about the Roman games, remember they were more than just bloody contests. They were a complex dance of power, politics, and performance, a testament to a culture that thrived on spectacle and savagery alike. And as we delve deeper into this world, we'll explore how these dynamics shaped the lives of those who lived in the shadow of the Colosseum. From the gladiators who fought for their lives to the editors who orchestrated their fates, all part of the grand tapestry of the Roman Empire, an empire built on the edge of a sword. But don't go sharpening your weapons just yet. There's more to uncover about this fascinating arena of life and death. So, speaking of the grand tapestry of the Roman Empire and its dazzling displays, let's unravel some of the most enduring myths that have been woven into our understanding of gladiatorial combat. First up, the famous thumbs up or thumbs down decision. Hollywood would have you believe it was the ultimate Roman Yelp review. Thumbs up, you live to fight another day. Thumbs down, you're about to become intimately acquainted with the arena floor. But alas, reality is never that straightforward. In truth, the whole thumb signal was likely a bit more nuanced. The Latin phrase parlis verso doesn't mean thumbs down as we interpret it today. Scholars suggest it more accurately described a thumb gesture of some sort, perhaps a turned thumb or even a thumb pressed against the palm. The exact motion is lost to time, but the key takeaway is that it wasn't as simple as a gladiator's life, hanging on whether a thumb was pointed to the heavens or the earth. Sometimes, the fate of a gladiator rested on the whims of the editor or the crowd's mood. And given Romans' love for drama, you can bet the decision was often a theatrical affair. Moving on, let's address the myth that every fight ended in death. Sure, the arena was a dangerous place, but it wasn't always a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Gladiators were, after all, valuable investments. Training a skilled fighter was costly, and no savvy editor wanted to squander their assets on gratuitous bloodshed. Estimates suggest that only about 10% of fights were to the death, which is still a grim statistic, but not quite the killfest pop culture loves to depict. Instead, many bouts were more about the spectacle and less about ending lives. The crowd was there for the drama, the clash of steel, the suspense of near death without actually reaching it. Think of it like a horror movie, a bit of a thrill, a lot of tension, but ultimately, most gladiators walked away with a few more scars and a story to tell. Or, in some cases, a ticket to freedom in the form of Arudis. But why did these games hold such a grip on Roman society? The answer lies in the potent mix of politics, propaganda, and social control. The games were a tool for the elite to demonstrate their power, generosity, and connection to Rome's storied traditions. Politicians used them as a form of public relations, a way to curry favor with the masses. The more extravagant the games, the better. Hosting lavish games was the ancient equivalent of a modern-day politician's campaign rally, only with a lot more swords and less empty promises. And while the games entertained, they also served to reinforce the societal pecking order. Gladiators, often from the lower rungs of society, became living examples of Roman ideals: courage, strength, resilience. Their struggles in the arena were a stark reminder of the empire's might and the power dynamics at play. The audience, a cross-section of Roman society, from the emperor to the commoners, was reminded of their place in the grand scheme and the privileges their status afforded. The games also created a shared experience, a collective catharsis that helped maintain the social fabric. In a city as vast and diverse as Rome, with its 1 million or so inhabitants, the Colosseum was a unifying force, a place where differences were set aside, if only for a few hours, in favor of a shared spectacle. It was part theater, part ritual, and completely Roman. Spectators, though, weren't just passive consumers of blood and gore. Their reactions could decisively sway the outcome of a gladiatorial bout. A crowd's roar could lift a fighter to glory or plunge him into oblivion. The audience's favor was a gladiator's most potent currency. A well-loved fighter could win over the crowd, who might then lobby the editor to spare him, thereby granting another day in the sun, or more precisely, another day under the blazing Roman sky. This fickle relationship between crowd and gladiator was a dance as old as the games themselves. The audience fed off the gladiator's blood, sweat, and tears, while the fighters thrived on the adulation and the tantalizing hope it offered. Hope of survival, of fame, of freedom. It was a complex, symbiotic relationship that underscored the gladiatorial game's role as both entertainment and a powerful instrument of social cohesion and control. And let's not forget the economic engine powering this grand spectacle. The games were big business, generating jobs and economic activity across the empire. From the construction of the venues to the training and upkeep of the gladiators, the games were a colossal enterprise requiring a vast network of artisans, trainers, and suppliers. Even the animals brought in for the games represented a logistical and economic feat involving traders, handlers, and transport across vast distances. It was a sprawling industry that touched nearly every aspect of Roman society. So, while it's tempting to see the gladiatorial games as mere barbaric spectacle, the reality is far more complex. They were a linchpin of Roman life, a reflection of its values and contradictions, its grandeur and brutality. They were a testament to the empire's power, but also its dependence on spectacle to maintain social order and political stability. And like all things Roman, they were a paradox, an artful blend of the sublime and the savage. As we continue our journey through the annals of gladiatorial history, keep in mind that every clash of swords and every roar of the crowd was more than just a fight for survival. It was part of a larger narrative, a story of power, politics, and the human condition. But we've still got more ground to cover, and the next chapter promises even more twists and turns in the tale of Rome's most infamous entertainers. So stay tuned, because the show is far from over. So, as we continue our deep dive into the world of gladiators, those ancient action heroes whose lives teetered between myth and mortality, it's time to look at how their legacy has been reshaped through the ages. Gladiators have been immortalized in countless films, novels, and video games, transforming from historical participants in a brutal sport into icons of courage and rebellion. Yet, for all the romanticized bravado, let's not forget the gritty reality. These warriors were often pawns in a game of imperial chess, their lives dictated by the whims of Rome's political elite. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and you'll find that our fascination with gladiators is still very much alive. But why do these figures captivate us so? Perhaps it's the allure of the underdog story, people rising against impossible odds. Or maybe it's the sheer spectacle of it all, the drama of life and death played out in an arena. In modern retellings, gladiators are often portrayed as noble rebels, standing against tyranny and oppression. It's a narrative that resonates, even if it glosses over the harsh realities of their existence. But let's not get too carried away by Hollywood's lens. The real gladiatorial life was far less glamorous. Recent archaeological findings have shed light on how these fighters lived and trained, offering a stark contrast to the polished images we've come to know. Excavations of gladiator cemeteries, like the one in Ephesus, Turkey, reveal the brutal nature of their lives. Skeletons show signs of multiple injuries, with fractures and blunt force trauma being common. Despite the violent nature of their profession, many gladiators lived surprisingly long lives, some into their 30s and 40, which, for the time, wasn't too shabby considering the average Roman had a life expectancy of about 25 years. Turns out, being a crowd favorite might have been a more effective shield than any piece of armor. Moreover, anthropological studies of their bones suggest a diet heavy in carbohydrates, debunking the idea of the gladiator as the ancient equivalent of a bodybuilder on a protein binge. Far from the lean, muscular figures we see today, these fighters were bulked up for durability. The discovery of a thick layer of bone around their joints, a result of a life of intense training and combat, tells us that gladiators were built to endure the unendurable. Yet, for all the grim realities unearthed, there remains a certain mystique about the gladiatorial games. They were more than just fights. They were a form of mass entertainment that kept the Roman populace engaged and distracted, a strategic tool wielded by emperors to maintain control. The games provided a sense of unity, albeit a bloody one, among a diverse and sprawling empire. They were a cathartic release, a chance for the common man to feel powerful as they decided the fate of a gladiator with a mere gesture. The moral complexities of such entertainment aren't lost on us today. While we may not be gathering in stone amphitheaters to watch combatants fight to the death, the allure of spectacle remains. Whether it's the latest blockbuster movie or a high-stakes sports match, there's something timeless about the thrill of competition and the drama of conflict. We see echoes of the gladiatorial spirit in modern culture, from the adulation of sports, stars to the narratives of resilience and triumph over adversity. that populate our media. The parallels between ancient and contemporary spectacles are striking, especially when considering the role of public entertainment in shaping societal norms. Just as the gladiatorial games were a reflection of Roman values, valor, strength, and the power of the mob, our current forms of entertainment reveal much about our own societal priorities. The narratives we choose to celebrate, the heroes we elevate, and the stories we tell are all part of the cultural tapestry that defines us. In a way, the legacy of the gladiators is a reminder of humanity's enduring thirst for stories that captivate and inspire, even as they mirror our own realities. The arenas may have changed, but the essence of spectacle and the desire for connection through shared experiences remain. We are drawn to tales of heroism and sacrifice because they speak to a fundamental part of the human experience, the struggle to find meaning and purpose in a world that is often chaotic and unpredictable. So, as we reflect on the gladiators and their place in history, let's appreciate both the legend and the reality. They were not just warriors in a sand-strewn pit, but symbols of a complex society that in many ways mirrors our own. They remind us of the power dynamics that govern entertainment and spectacle, and the fine line between admiration and exploitation. In closing, the story of the gladiators is not just about ancient Rome, it's about us. It's about the stories we tell, the heroes we create, and the shadows of the past that linger in our collective consciousness. As you mull over these tales of valor and tragedy, consider how they reflect your own world, the narratives you embrace, the myths you perpetuate, and the truths you choose to acknowledge. Because, in the end, history is not just a record of what was, but a lens through which we view what is and what might be. And with that thought, dear listener, I leave you to ponder the echoes of the past in the gladiatorial arena of the present. In a world where monarchies are mostly ceremonial, and emperors rarely wield actual power, Emperor Akihito of Japan ascended the chrysanthemum throne in 1989 with a flair for breaking tradition. As the 125th emperor of a line that claims an unbroken lineage stretching back to 660 BCE, Akihito had some pretty big shoes, or perhaps more aptly, sandals, to fill. But what truly made headlines was not just his accession, but his choice of partner. Akihito was the first Japanese emperor to marry a commoner, Michiko Shoda, a move that sent ripples through the stiff and starched corridors of the imperial household. So, let's set the scene. It's 1989, and Japan is on the verge of a new era. The old Showa era, led by Akihito's father, Emperor Hirohito, had been a roller coaster ride through war, defeat, and eventual economic boom. But Hirohito's death left the nation at a crossroads. Enter Akihito, a man whose reign marked the beginning of the Heisei era. The word Heisei means peace everywhere, which was a tall order for a nation still grappling with its past and a rapidly changing global landscape. Now, here's where things get interesting. Akihito wasn't your average emperor. He was a man who studied marine biology and was published on the topic of goby fish. Yes, you heard that right, goby fish. We're talking serious scientific journals, not just a hobbyist's weekend project. So while the world might have expected a traditional figurehead, they got an emperor who could tell you more about the intricacies of fish behavior than the average marine biologist. One of the more humorous aspects of Akihito's reign was the imperial household agency, an institution so steeped in tradition and protocol that it makes Buckingham Palace look like a casual get-together. This agency controlled every aspect of imperial life, from the emperor's schedule to the color of the napkins at state banquets. And yet, it had to adapt to an emperor who wasn't afraid to shake things up. Akihito introduced a more approachable image of the monarchy, making public appearances that were more than just perfunctory hand-waving. He and Empress Michiko, with her commoner background, often appeared together, embodying a modern royal image that was both relatable and refreshing. But let's not sugarcoat it. The transition from Showa to Heisei wasn't all smooth sailing. Japan was facing an economic bubble that would burst spectacularly in the early 1990s, leading to what's known as the Lost Decade. The economic downturn meant that the emperor's role as a symbol of national unity was more important than ever. Akihito and Michiko were often seen touring disaster-stricken areas, offering comfort and empathy, a far cry from the untouchable aura of past emperors. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the romantic notion of emperors as divine beings. After World War II, Emperor Hirohito had to renounce his divinity, which was as awkward as it sounds. Imagine being told your entire life that you're a living god, only to have that rug pulled out from under you. Akihito grew up in this post-divine era, but the shadows of past beliefs lingered. The idea that an emperor could be both ordinary and extraordinary was a balancing act that Akihito managed with surprising ease. Now, let's talk about Akihito's marriage to Michiko Shoda in 1959, a union that was both revolutionary and controversial. Michiko was a commoner and a graduate of the University of the Sacred Heart, a Catholic institution pretty radical for a future empress. Their love story supposedly began on a tennis court, which sounds like something out of a romantic comedy, but in reality, it was a strategic match that reshaped the monarchy. The media was captivated, and public sentiment was overwhelmingly positive. It was like Japan's own royal fairy tale, except this one was real. However, the path to wedded bliss wasn't without its trials. The Imperial Household Agency wasn't thrilled about Michiko's entry into the royal family. There were whispers and rumors, and Michiko reportedly faced intense pressure from the agency, leading to periods of ill health. But the couple's resilience and unity were evident, setting a precedent for future generations of Japan's royals to marry for love rather than duty. So why does all this matter? Well, Akihito's reign marked a pivot towards a more modern, approachable image of the Japanese monarchy. He was a bridge between ancient traditions and contemporary values. In a world where monarchies are often seen as outdated relics, Akihito brought a breath of fresh air, showing that even the most traditional of institutions can evolve. In summary, the start of Akihito's reign was like a fresh breeze blowing through the stuffy halls of the imperial palace. His modern approach, love for science, and dedication to his people set the tone for an era that promised peace and hope, even as Japan faced economic and social challenges. The Heisei era may have started with the weight of history on its shoulders, but thanks to Emperor Akihito and Empress Michiko, it also carried the promise of a more relatable and humane monarchy. So there you have it, a tale of emperors, commoners, goby fish, and one very modern love story. The Heisei era was off to a memorable start, and the best was yet to come. So, as the Heisei era unfurled its sails under Emperor Akihito's watchful gaze, Japan found itself caught in a whirlwind of economic mania that would make any Wall Street thriller look like a children's bedtime story. If the late 1980s in Japan were a soap opera, it was one where everyone was secretly dating the stock market, and each plot twist involved another zero being added to Tokyo real estate prices. Forget Tokyo drift. It was more like Tokyo inflate. Let's talk numbers, shall we? In the frothy climax of Japan's asset price bubble, the land beneath the imperial palace was famously rumored to be worth more than the entire state of California. Now, while that might sound like something out of a particularly feverish Monopoly game, it does give you a sense of the sheer scale of madness. By 1989, the value of Japan's land had ballooned to over 2 quadrillion yen. That's quadrillion with a Q, folks, a number so absurd it sounds like something a toddler would make up. The Nikkei 225 index, Japan's stock market darling, was enjoying a joyride of its own, peaking at nearly 39,000 points in December 1989. For some context, it hadn't even reached half that number by the time the early 2000s rolled around. And then, well, reality decided to RSVP to the party. The bubble burst, and it wasn't just a pinprick. It was more like a cannonball. The Nikkei plummeted, and by 1992, it was hovering around the 50,000 mark, a sobering wake-up call with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Real estate prices, once the golden goose of the economy, began to tumble like a house of cards in a windstorm. Suddenly, the land that was supposed to be worth more than California could barely compete with a decent-sized U.S. city. It was as though the entire country had been living in a dream, and someone had just flipped on the harsh fluorescent lights. The economic fallout led to what is now wistfully remembered as the lost decade, though calling it lost feels a bit like calling a tornado a breeze. This period stretched well beyond the 1990s, casting a long shadow over the national psyche. The economy stagnated, banks faltered under the weight of bad loans, and unemployment became a ghost haunting the workforce. The Heisei era, with its promise of peace everywhere, really had its work cut out just delivering a little financial stability. Now, what does all this have to do with our marine biologist emperor? Well, Akihito's reign, while largely ceremonial, was also symbolic. In times of crisis, symbols matter more than ever. While the economy was doing its best impersonation of a sinking ship, Akihito and Empress Michiko took on the role of empathetic leaders. They became the nation's emotional anchor, often seen visiting disaster sites, comforting those affected, and showing a genuine connection with the people. A stark contrast to the aloofness traditionally expected of the imperial family. But let's not sugarcoat it. No amount of imperial handshakes was going to fix the economy. Japan's policymakers were scrambling to figure out how to patch up the gaping holes left by the bubble burst. Interest rates were slashed, and fiscal stimulus packages were rolled out like carpets at a royal procession. Yet recovery seemed as elusive as a goby fish in murky waters. The government's attempts to jumpstart the economy often felt like trying to revive a rock concert with a kazoo. And in this theater of economic despair, a new kind of myth was born. The myth of the Japanese salaryman, the tireless, self-sacrificing worker bee of the corporate hive. While there's a certain romantic appeal to the idea of an entire nation united by shared hardship, the reality was far more grueling. Long hours, job insecurity, and the constant pressure to perform added up to a society teetering on the brink of exhaustion. Work culture became a badge of honor and a scar, both at once. Through it all, Emperor Akihito remained a stabilizing presence. While he couldn't wave a magic wand and fix the economy, his humility and dedication offered a different kind of leadership. The Heisei era might have started with economic promise, but it evolved into a lesson in resilience. Akihito's reign was a reminder that while empires rise and fall, the human capacity to endure remains steadfast. As we leave the 1990s behind, the shadow of the lost decade still looms, a reminder of the perils of unchecked exuberance. Yet the Heisei era wasn't just about economic woes. It was a time of cultural introspection, societal change, and yes, even a few moments of joy amid the storm. So hold onto your hats, because the story of Akihito's reign isn't over yet. The winds of change are still blowing, and there's much more history to unfold. As the Heisei era swirled forward, Emperor Akihito found himself in a role that was less about ceremonial pomp and more about symbolic healing. You see, Japan had this little historical hiccup known as World War II, a conflict that left scars deeper than a samurai sword could carve. Akihito, inheriting a nation still haunted by its militaristic past, took on the audacious mission of redefining the emperor's role in a pacifist Japan. This wasn't just about shaking hands and smiling for the cameras. This was about embarking on what you might call an apology tour with all the grace of a diplomat and the humility of a man who knew that history's weight could crush or it could uplift. Now, let's set the stage. The Japanese Constitution, drafted in the aftermath of World War II, famously renounced war as a sovereign right. It's there in Article 9, which might as well be bolded, underlined, and highlighted. The emperor, once seen as a divine figurehead of wartime ambition, was now a symbol of peace. Quite the career pivot, wouldn't you say? Akihito embraced this new role with the zeal of a man determined to turn a new page in Japan's history book, even if that meant revisiting some uncomfortable chapters. Picture this. It's 1992, and Akihito is making history as the first Japanese emperor to visit China, the site of some of Japan's most infamous wartime actions. This is not your average state visit with the usual pageantry and pleasantries. Akihito, with his trademark humility, expressed deep sorrow for the suffering caused, a move that was as bold as it was necessary. It was an apology that, while not universally accepted, marked a significant step in acknowledging the past. And let's be honest, in the world of international diplomacy, this was akin to a mic drop moment. But Akihito's grand apology tour wasn't without its missteps. Diplomatic faux pas. Oh, there were plenty. Take, for example, the time he visited the Philippines in 2016. The trip itself was a delicate dance, given the complex history between the two nations. Yet, amidst the formal addresses and cultural exchanges, there was that awkward moment when the local press questioned Japan's wartime actions with a bluntness that could have peeled paint off the walls. Akihito, ever the statesman, handled it with poise, though you could sense the tension simmering just beneath the surface. It was a reminder that while apologies can bridge divides, they can't erase history. This era of contrition wasn't just about saying sorry, though. It was about redefining what it meant to be an emperor in a modern, globalized world. Akihito's approach was less imperial majesty and more global citizen. He stepped out of the gilded cage of the imperial palace and into the world, engaging in the kind of hands-on diplomacy that involved more travel miles than a rock band on tour. His visits to countries like South Korea, the United Kingdom, and even former adversaries like the United States weren't just about mending fences. They were about building bridges that could withstand the weight of history. Back home, Akihito was navigating the tricky waters of domestic opinion. The Japanese public, forever wrestling with the ghosts of their past, had mixed feelings about these apology tours. For some, Akihito's efforts were a balm, a necessary acknowledgement of truths long buried. For others, it was a painful reopening of old wounds. Yet, amidst this national soul-searching, Akihito maintained a steadfast belief in the power of reconciliation, a belief that sometimes put him at odds with more conservative elements within Japan. And speaking of odd moments, let's not forget the time Akihito, ever the marine biologist at heart, used a scientific conference in Hawaii as an opportunity to engage in a unique form of diplomacy. While discussing, of all things, fish migration patterns, he managed to weave in a message about the interconnectedness of nations, a diplomatic maneuver as subtle as a fish's fin in murky water. It was a classic Akihito move, blending science with statesmanship in a way that left everyone nodding along, even if they weren't quite sure where the conversation was headed. But Akihito's efforts to redefine the imperial role weren't all grand gestures and international tours. Sometimes they were as simple as a moment of silence. In 2015, marking the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II, Akihito and Empress Michiko stood in solemn reflection at Tokyo's Nippon Budokan, paying tribute to the war dead with a dignity that spoke volumes without uttering a word. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound statements are those left unspoken. Yet, despite these efforts, Akihito's journey wasn't without its critics. Some argued that his apologies were too frequent, too subservient, even. Others felt they didn't go far enough. It was a classic no-win scenario, but one that Akihito navigated with an unwavering commitment to peace and reconciliation. He wasn't just rewriting the role of the emperor. He was redefining what it meant to lead with humility and grace in a world often defined by bluster and bravado. So, as we look at Akihito's reign, it becomes clear that his legacy is one of subtlety and nuance. He didn't wield power in the traditional sense, but his influence was felt in the quiet moments of reflection he inspired, the bridges he built, and the conversations he started. Akihito's reign was a testament to the idea that sometimes the most significant changes happen not with a bang, but with the gentle ripple of a tide turning, steering the ship of state towards a future that acknowledges the past without being anchored by it. And as we pause here, with Akihito's apology tours leaving both a mark and a question in their wake, we find ourselves at a crossroads yet again. The Heisei era, a time of profound change and introspection, continues to unfold, with its lessons echoing into the present. Stay tuned, because this journey through history is far from over. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover as we continue to follow the path laid out by a most unconventional emperor. As Akihito's Heisei era unfolded, Japan found itself swept up in a cultural revolution that made the 1960s look like a mere dress rehearsal. You see, the 90s and early 2000s weren't just about economic recovery. They were a time when Japan's cultural exports started to take over the world like a benevolent army of Pikachus. Akihito, a man who could have easily stayed ensconced in the traditional cocoon of imperial life, instead found himself navigating the choppy waters of technology and pop culture. It was as if the emperor was trying to surf a digital wave while the rest of the world watched, half amazed and half hoping he wouldn't wipe out. Let's start with the most obvious shift, Technology. Japan was already a tech giant, but the Heisei era saw it solidifying its status as the Silicon Valley of the East. By the mid-90s, Japan's tech industry was cranking out innovations faster than you can say PlayStation. Sony launched the original PlayStation in 1994, a little grey box that would go on to redefine gaming and sell over 100 million units globally. Meanwhile, Akihito's own engagement with technology was a bit more, shall we say, endearing. Imagine an emperor who probably still used a rotary phone trying to understand the allure of video games. It's a bit like your grandpa asking why you're so obsessed with your smartphone, but with more ceremonial robes involved. But Akihito wasn't just a silent observer in this digital revolution. In a surprising move, he authorized the digitization of the Imperial Archives, opening up a treasure trove of historical documents to scholars worldwide. This was akin to letting a bunch of history nerds loose in a candy store. Suddenly, researchers could access centuries of Japanese history with a few clicks, unraveling the past like a particularly tangled ball of yarn. This transparency was revolutionary for the imperial household, an institution that had traditionally guarded its secrets like a dragon with its hoard. And speaking of transparency, Akihito's reign coincided with Japan taking a long, hard look in the mirror when it came to its own cultural identity. As Western culture flooded in, think McDonald's, Hollywood, and rock and roll, Japan responded not by rejecting these influences, but by remixing them into something uniquely Japanese. This cultural mashup gave rise to phenomena like J-pop and anime, which became global sensations. The music industry, spearheaded by groups like SMAP and Hikaru Utada, saw its stars achieving a level of fame that made Beatlemania look like a quiet fan club meeting. By the late 1990s, J-pop was a multi-billion yen industry, with idol groups drawing devoted followers from Tokyo to Toronto. Anime, too, became a cultural juggernaut. Shows like Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon weren't just TV series. They were cultural exports that helped Japan project its soft power across the globe. By 1997, Parkayman had launched its first video game, TV show, and trading card series, generating over $90 billion in revenue to date. Imagine the imperial family watching an episode of Parkayman, trying to make sense of Pikachu's electric charm while sipping on traditional green tea, a collision of cultures as delightful as it was surreal. But let's not get too swept away in the romance of Japan's cultural renaissance without acknowledging some harsh realities. Beneath the surface of this cultural boom lay a society grappling with new challenges, like the struggle to balance modernity with tradition. The rapid pace of change led to a kind of generational whiplash, where the older generation found itself bewildered by the shifting sands of social norms. The rise of technology and pop culture brought with it questions about identity and values, challenging Japan to reconcile its rich heritage with the flashy allure of the digital age. Amidst all this, Emperor Akihito remained a figure of stability and continuity. His openness to cultural and technological shifts made him a surprisingly relevant figure in an era when monarchies often felt like relics of a bygone age. Akihito's willingness to adapt, even awkwardly, to the changing world around him made him a more relatable figure. It was as if he was saying, "Hey, I might not fully get this whole internet thing, but I'm willing to give it a shot." This willingness to engage with the modern world, even if it meant occasionally fumbling through it, endeared him to a public hungry for leaders who could bridge the gap between past and present. Yet, the emperor's engagement with technology wasn't just about embracing the new. It was also about preserving the old. By digitizing the imperial archives, Akihito was ensuring that Japan's history could be accessed and understood by future generations. It was a nod to the past, a promise that while the world might rush headlong into the digital future, the lessons of history would not be forgotten. In a way, Akihito was playing the long game, understanding that while pop culture might capture the moment, history captures the soul. Meanwhile, Japan's pop culture was doing its part to reshape global perceptions of the country. No longer was Japan just the land of samurai and sushi. It was a vibrant tapestry of innovation, creativity, and cultural exchange. The world was enchanted by Japan's ability to blend tradition with modernity, and Akihito's reign was a testament to this delicate balancing act. He may not have been the mastermind behind the cultural tsunami, but his leadership provided the stability needed for such creativity to flourish. And as Japan hurtled towards the new millennium, Akihito found himself at the helm of a nation that was both looking to the future and deeply rooted in its past. The Heisei era was a time of contradictions, a period when the world was getting smaller, yet the cultural landscape was expanding in ways few could have predicted. Through it all, Akihito remained a steady presence, a reminder that while emperors might no longer wield power, they can still inspire. So, as we continue to unravel the story of Akihito's reign, we find ourselves drawn into a narrative that is as complex as it is compelling. It's a tale of cultural shifts and technological leaps, of an emperor navigating the choppy waters of modernity with a grace that belied his traditional role. And while the Heisei era is far from over, one thing is clear. Akihito's legacy is one of adaptation and resilience, a testament to the enduring power of a monarchy willing to evolve in a world that never stops changing. Stay tuned, because the Heisei era still has more stories to tell. There's more history to uncover and more myths to challenge as we explore the intricate tapestry of a nation that has always danced between the old and the new, led by an emperor who understood the importance of both. The journey isn't over yet, and the best is yet to come. And so, as the Heisei era unfolded its final chapters, Japan found itself at a momentous crossroads. Emperor Akihito, the scholarly sovereign with a penchant for goby fish and humble gestures, had one last trick up his sleeve, a move so unprecedented that it hadn't been attempted in over 2 centuries: abdication. That's right, in 2019, Akihito decided to hang up his imperial crown, a decision that would send shockwaves through the chrysanthemum throne and resonate worldwide. Let's put this into perspective. The last time a Japanese emperor abdicated, America was still a collection of British colonies. The French were dabbling with the Enlightenment, and the concept of an internet would have sounded like sorcery. Emperor Kakaku was the last to step down voluntarily in 1817, leaving a lengthy pause before Akihito took a page from his predecessor's playbook. But why abdicate now, you ask? Well, Akihito, facing the ripe old age of 85, cited health issues and the rigors of the role as his reasons. It was a decision that required a special law approved by the Diet and set the stage for a peaceful transition of power. In stepping down, Akihito reminded everyone that even emperors are human, capable of bowing out gracefully when the time is right. Enter the Reiwa era. On May 1, 2019, Akihito's elder son, Naruhito, ascended the throne, ushering in a new era that promised beautiful harmony. Naruhito, like his father, was no stranger to breaking with tradition. Educated at Oxford and married to Masako Oda, a Harvard-educated diplomat, Naruhito embodied a modern monarch for a new age. But let's not pretend this transition was as smooth as silk. Masako's introduction to imperial life was anything but a fairy tale. She faced immense pressure from the imperial household agency, which might as well be called the stress factory, given its history of micromanaging royal lives. The agency's intense scrutiny led to Masako's struggle with adjustment disorder, a reminder that the weight of the crown can be as heavy as a sumo wrestler on a seesaw. Yet despite these personal challenges, the dawn of the Reiwa era brought with it a renewed sense of optimism. Naruhito, with his background in water management and global diplomacy, was poised to steer Japan through contemporary challenges, from climate change to international relations. But as the Reiwa era took its first tentative steps, it was a moment to reflect on Akihito's legacy, a legacy that was as layered as a well-crafted haiku. Akihito's reign was a masterclass in balancing the romanticized image of an emperor with the very human challenges he faced. The world often views emperors as figures of mystery and grandeur, wrapped in silks and steeped in centuries-old tradition. But Akihito, with his approachable demeanor and genuine empathy, shattered this illusion like a porcelain teacup meeting a concrete floor. His reign was marked by an unprecedented engagement with the public, from visiting disaster sites to addressing historical grievances. He was less about pomp and more about people, a refreshing contrast to the aloofness that often accompanies royalty. But let's get real. Akihito's journey wasn't paved with rose petals. The economic turmoil of the lost decade, the burden of Japan's wartime past, and the constant tug-of-war between modernity and tradition were formidable obstacles. Yet, throughout these challenges, Akihito's quiet strength and humility stood out. In a world obsessed with power, he demonstrated that true leadership often lies in service and understanding. And speaking of understanding, the myth-busting truth is that Akihito's reign wasn't about wielding power, but about wielding influence. As a constitutional monarch, his role was largely symbolic, yet his actions spoke volumes. He was a figure of continuity in a rapidly changing world, a beacon of stability that Japan could rely on. His ability to adapt, to embrace change while honoring tradition, was a lesson in resilience that extends far beyond the borders of Japan. As we wrap up this journey through the Heisei era, it's clear that Akihito's legacy is both complex and compelling. He redefined what it meant to be an emperor in the 21st century, bridging the gap between the old and the new with grace and humility. His decision to abdicate was a fitting end to a reign that was always about knowing when to step forward and when to step back. So what's the takeaway from this imperial saga? Perhaps it's that the true measure of a leader isn't found in the trappings of power, but in the ability to connect with others and to navigate the challenges of the times with wisdom and empathy. In a world where history often repeats itself, Akihito's reign offers a reminder that even the most traditional of roles can evolve, and that sometimes the most profound legacies are those built on compassion and understanding. And as the Reiwa era unfolds, we find ourselves looking to the future while carrying the lessons of the past. Naruhito has big sandals to fill, but with a foundation built on Akihito's legacy, he's poised to lead Japan into a new chapter, one where harmony and progress go hand in hand. So here's to the emperors who dare to be human, the eras that defy expectations, and the stories that remind us of the power of change. Until next time, keep your curiosity piqued and your historical lenses sharp, because history, much like the tides, is always in motion. Time. It's that one thing we never seem to have enough of, yet it's a concept older than your grandma's favorite recipe. Ancient civilizations didn't have the luxury of checking their Apple Watches or glancing at digital clocks mounted on every wall. Nope, they had to rely on some pretty inventive, and occasionally downright bizarre, methods to keep track of the hours. And don't let anyone tell you these folks weren't clever. They were downright ingenious, and perhaps just a little bit insane, when it came to figuring out what time it was. Let's dive into the world where sundials and water clocks ruled the day. First up, the sundial. These bad boys were basically the original solar-powered clocks, long before solar panels were even a gleam in Elon Musk's eye. The Egyptians were among the first to get into the sundial game around 1500 BCE. Picture an upright stick, known as a gnomon. No, not a garden gnome, though that would be hilarious, casting a shadow on a flat surface. As the sun moved across the sky, the shadow did too, marking the passage of time. Simple, right? Well, not quite. Sundials worked swimmingly when the sun was shining, but come nightfall or a particularly cloudy day, and you were back to guessing whether it was time for bed or just a really long lunch break. The Greeks and Romans, never ones to be outdone, took sundials and ran with them, metaphorically of course. They started adding all sorts of bells and whistles to these solar timekeepers. By the time the Roman architect Vitruvius was penning his famous works in the 1st century BCE, there were at least 13 types of sundials. Yes, 13. They had hemispherical dials, conical dials, and even portable ones you could carry around, kind of like the ancient version of a pocket watch. But just like today's gadgets, these fancy sundials came with their own sets of frustrations. They had to be meticulously aligned with the Earth's axis and adjusted for latitude differences. Otherwise, you might end up thinking it was noon when it was really time for dinner. But what about when the sun wasn't playing ball? Enter the water clock, or as the Greeks called it, the clepsydra. This was time served up with a splash. The earliest known water clocks date back to around 1500 BCE in Babylon and Egypt. These were essentially bowls with a small hole in the bottom, gradually allowing water to drip out at a steady rate. Time was measured by the level of water left in the bowl. Ingenious, right? But oh boy, were there quirks. For one, the flow rate of water isn't exactly constant. It changes with temperature and pressure. So, if a cold snap hit, your clock might end up running slower than your grandma's Wi-Fi. The Greeks, never ones to settle, decided to get snazzy with their water clocks. Take Ctesibius, for instance, a Greek engineer from the 3rd century BCE. He added a float and a dial to make the time-telling more precise. The Romans, of course, loved this idea and adopted it faster than you can say, carpe diem. They even used water clocks in their courts to limit the time lawyers could speak, kind of like the ancient version of the Oscars play-off music. But despite all these innovations, water clocks still couldn't shake off their reputation for being a bit unreliable. They were high maintenance, needing constant refilling and adjustments. Not exactly the kind of clock you'd want to rely on for catching a train. But why all this fuss over time? Well, in a world without electricity, artificial light, or the concept of standardized time zones, keeping track of time was crucial for everything from religious rituals to agriculture. Knowing what time it was could mean the difference between a successful harvest and a crop failure, or between making it to a festival and missing out on the ancient equivalent of Coachella. And here's where the myth-busting comes in. While we might romanticize these early timekeepers as symbols of ancient wisdom, the reality was a bit more chaotic. Sundials were often inaccurate due to seasonal changes, and water clocks were prone to all sorts of hiccups. But here's the kicker. They didn't care about exact minutes and seconds like we do today. Their lives weren't governed by the tick-tock of a clock, but by the natural rhythms of day and night, planting and harvesting, feasting and fasting. So, while the sundial and water clock might seem like quaint relics from a bygone era, they were technological marvels in their day. They remind us that even in ancient times, people were obsessed with the passage of time, just like we are today. They were creative, pragmatic, and maybe a little bit nuts, but they laid the foundation for the timekeeping devices that would follow. So, next time you glance at your watch, or check the time on your phone, spare a thought for those ancient innovators who were just trying to figure out if it was time for lunch, or if they'd missed their favorite gladiator match. So, next time you glance at your watch, or check the time on your phone, spare a thought for those ancient innovators who were just trying to figure out if it was time for lunch, or if they'd missed their favorite gladiator match. But here's the kicker. All that fuss over time wasn't just for marking the start of a feast or the end of a festival. Nope, time was money, literally. Let's dive into how these ancient timekeeping methods were the backbone of economic life, and boy, did they shape societies in ways that would make even Wall Street sit up and take notice. First, let's talk about the Romans, those toga-wearing titans of time management. In Rome, the concept of hori, or hours, was central to daily life, and not just for setting up a dinner date. The Romans divided the daytime into 12 hours, starting at sunrise and ending at sunset, with the length of each hour changing with the seasons. Imagine explaining that to your boss when you're late to work. Sorry, it's not me, it's the sun. Now, why does this matter? Well, Roman workers were often paid by the hour. That's right. Long before you were clocking in for your 9 to 5, Roman laborers were keeping an eye on the sundial to make sure they got paid for every precious hora they worked. This hourly wage system meant that timekeeping was not just a matter of convenience, but a financial necessity. Miss the start of your shift because your sundial was off, and you might miss a chunk of your paycheck. A concept painfully familiar to anyone who's ever had to deal with a malfunctioning punch clock. And let's not forget the market days. The Roman marketplace, or forum, was a bustling hub of commerce, a place where time truly was of the essence. Markets operated on strict schedules, often dictated by the rising and setting sun, since artificial lighting wasn't exactly an option. Traders and buyers relied on accurate timekeeping to make sure they got the best deals. Arrive too late, and you might find the stalls empty and all the best goods gone, much like showing up to a garage sale at noon. In this way, time became intertwined with the economics of supply and demand. Then there were the Greeks, those ancient aficionados of philosophy and finance. They too had a knack for organizing their economic life around the clock. Greek cities were marked by the rhythm of the agora, their version of the marketplace. Agoras weren't just places to pick up your weekly olives and amphoras of wine. They were economic engines that ran on a precise schedule. Merchants set up shop at dawn, and by dusk they packed up their wares, all synchronized by the communal understanding of time. This was a world where being fashionably late could mean missing out on your dinner. Now, here's a fun fact to impress your friends at your next trivia night. The Greeks even had a term for the official end of the market day, catabasis. It was a civic duty to adhere to this schedule. City officials would announce the end of trading hours, ensuring everyone had an equal shot at commerce. So, if you ever thought time management was just a modern obsession, think again. These ancient societies were laying down the frameworks for economic systems that would echo through the centuries. But let's not romanticize this too much. While the Greeks and Romans certainly got the ball rolling, their systems were far from perfect. Sundials and water clocks, as we've seen, were not exactly precision instruments. They were prone to errors, influenced by everything from geographical location to the whims of the weather. Imagine running a business where your profits could be sunk by an overcast day. Talk about high stakes. And yet, despite these challenges, these ancient timekeepers were doing more than just telling time. They were anchoring the economic activities that sustained empires. Time dictated when workers plowed fields, when sailors set sail, and when merchants opened their stalls. It wasn't just about hours and minutes. It was about coordinating the complex dance of human activity that kept societies thriving. Let's circle back to the Romans and their knack for bureaucracy. In Rome, the office of the curator aquarum, the official in charge of water supplies, was a crucial role. These curators ensured that water clocks were maintained and accurate because they understood that timekeeping was essential for the smooth operation of public and economic life. Water clocks, despite their quirks, were used in everything from planning military campaigns to organizing public games. Imagine trying to coordinate a gladiator spectacle without knowing when the lions were supposed to appear. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more intricate, let's tip our hats to the Egyptians, who were all about precision. They took water clocks to a whole new level by adding complex gear systems to regulate the flow of water more consistently. It's almost as if they were trying to create their own version of a Swiss watch millennia before Switzerland was even a thing. Egyptian priests used these clocks to time religious ceremonies, ensuring everything ran like, well, clockwork. Their meticulous nature wasn't just about religious fervor. It was a reflection of how deeply intertwined timekeeping was with maintaining social and economic order. In these ancient societies, time wasn't just about marking the passage of the day. It was a vital component of economic stability. It dictated the rhythms of work, trade, and social interaction. So, while today we might fret about daylight saving time or grumble when our smartphone clocks don't sync, spare a thought for the ancient Romans and Greeks. They were grappling with these same issues long before the concept of a 40-hour workweek was even a glimmer in anyone's eye. While we romanticize the past, thinking of it as a simpler time, the reality was that those ancient folks were just as obsessed with maximizing their days as we are. They didn't have Google Calendar, but they had sundials and water clocks, and they used them to lay down the very foundations of our modern economic systems. And that, my friends, is the true power of time, the ultimate currency that's been shaping our world for millennia. But hold on to your hats, because we're just getting started. Next up, we'll see how these timekeeping practices fed into the rise of empires and the fall of great leaders. Stay tuned. And speaking of timekeeping and empires, let's turn our sundials towards the political power moves of ancient civilizations. Because, believe it or not, knowing the time wasn't just about making sure your toga was washed before the forum's open mic poetry night. No. It was about control, influence, and sometimes good old-fashioned manipulation. Let's start our historical escapade with the Egyptians. Those folks had pyramids, hieroglyphs, pharaohs who thought they were living gods. No ego problems there, right? But here's the kicker. Egyptian priests wielded their astronomical knowledge like a magic wand to maintain authority. They were the gatekeepers of calendars, predicting the annual flooding of the Nile with the accuracy of a Vegas card counter. This wasn't just a neat party trick. It was essential for agriculture and survival. Without the Nile's floodwaters, Egypt's fields would be dustier than a pharaoh's tomb. Now, you might be wondering, how did the priests get away with such a power grab? Well, for starters, they controlled the Saarthic cycle, a 460-year calendar based on the star Sirius. By predicting when Sirius would rise, they could pinpoint the start of the agricultural year. This knowledge gave them a stranglehold on power because, in ancient Egypt, if you controlled the floods, you controlled the food, and if you controlled the food, well, you were basically running the show. Imagine trying to tell a pharaoh that his priests were wrong about the flood time. It'd be like telling a modern-day executive their quarterly forecasts are off, except instead of a demotion, you might end up as a decorative wall painting. So the priests kept their celestial secrets under lock and key, ensuring the sun and their power rose and set on their terms. But Egypt wasn't the only time-manic empire. Hop over the Mediterranean, and you'll find the Romans, who took time synchronization to a level that would make a Swiss watchmaker blush. Roman emperors, those grandmasters of governance, understood that controlling time was akin to controlling the empire itself. They needed to keep the massive Roman machine running smoothly, and that meant getting everyone from Britain to Byzantium on the same schedule. Enter the Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar in 45 BCE. Prior to this reform, the Roman calendar was about as predictable as a cat on catnip. Months drifted with the seasons, festivals appeared randomly, and you could never be quite sure if your birthday was actually in spring or abruptly in winter. Julius, with a little help from an Alexandrian astronomer, Sarsigenes, introduced the 365-day year with a leap day every 4 years. This was revolutionary, giving the empire a stable framework that kept everything from military campaigns to tax collections on track. The calendar reform wasn't just about making sure nobody forgot Caesar's birthday. It was about asserting control over a sprawling empire. By synchronizing time, the Roman emperors could orchestrate a symphony of civic, religious, and military events, ensuring that the empire's vast clockwork didn't miss a beat. And let's face it, when you're running an empire that stretches from the cold, rainy shores of Britannia to the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt, you need all the help you can get in keeping things together. However, the Romans weren't just about calendars and sun-drenched amphitheaters. They had their own quirks when it came to timekeeping. For instance, they used something called the nundinal cycle, an 8-day market week, which is like a 7-day week, but with one extra day to really confuse everyone. This cycle was the backbone of Roman commerce, dictating when markets would open and close. Merchants, soldiers, and even politicians had to march to the beat of this peculiar drum, ensuring that the empire's economic heart kept pumping. But with great power comes great bureaucracy. The Romans, true to their love of red tape, had officials dedicated to making sure the calendar was followed to the letter. Imagine being the guy responsible for telling Julius Caesar that his calendar needs a tweak. Talk about a high-pressure job. But it was crucial because a misaligned calendar could mean crops planted at the wrong time, taxes collected late, or, heaven forbid, a festival held in the wrong month. The horror. And while we're talking about emperors and their obsessions with time, let's not forget the monumental timepieces they built to show off their dominance. The most famous of these is the horologium of Augustus, constructed in 10 BCE. This wasn't just a sundial, it was a statement. Augustus used an Egyptian obelisk as the gnomon, and it was said to cast a shadow on a marble surface that stretched over 160 meters. It was a literal shadow over Rome, a reminder of Augustus's power and the empire's reach, which, considering the obelisk was originally borrowed from Egypt, was a bit of a flex. In essence, controlling time allowed rulers to control narratives. It let them dictate when events happened and how they were remembered. Time was a canvas, and each emperor painted their own legacy on it, hoping to be remembered as the orchestrator of the grand Roman opera. But let's not kid ourselves. While the emperors were busy immortalizing themselves, the day-to-day reality was far messier. Calendars required constant adjustment, and political turmoil often threw the empire's timekeeping into disarray. Yet, the Romans soldiered on, driven by their relentless pursuit of order in a chaotic world. So, as we unravel these ancient power plays, it's clear that time wasn't just a tool for scheduling brunch. It was an instrument of control, shaping empires, and influencing the lives of everyone from emperors to everyday citizens. The Egyptians used it to maintain their theocratic grip, while the Romans wielded it to synchronize an empire that spanned continents. It's a reminder that while the sundials and water clocks of old may seem quaint to us now, they were the backbone of civilizations, the ticking heartbeats of empires. But don't set your sundials just yet. We're not through. There's much more to explore as we continue to unravel how these ancient timekeeping practices fed into the rise and fall of great leaders. So, stay with me, because the sands of time are still shifting, and we've got more history to uncover. All right, we've been wandering through the sands of time like a lost tourist in the ancient world, And now it's time to dive into the mesmerizing mythos of timekeeping. We're talking about the legends, the lore, and the larger-than-life tales that had ancient folks spinning yarns faster than an over-caffeinated bard at a medieval fair. You see, while sundials and water clocks were the workhorses of timekeeping, the stories surrounding them were the icing on the cake, a cake that was occasionally baked with a liberal dose of fiction. Let's kick things off with a heavyweight from Greek mythology, Kronos. Now, don't confuse him with Cronus, the titan who had a penchant for devouring his offspring like they were on a platter at an all-you-can-eat buffet. Kronos, on the other hand, was the personification of time itself, a god so mighty he could make Father Time look like a wristwatch salesman. In Greek mythology, Kronos was often depicted as an old man with a long, flowing beard, carrying a scythe or an hourglass, because what's a time guard without some stereotypical accessories? The Greeks, with their love for philosophy and metaphors, saw Kronos as a symbol of the inexorable passage of time. He was the ticking clock of destiny, a reminder that time waits for no one, not even gods. This myth of Kronos added a layer of existential drama to timekeeping, suggesting that while humans might try to measure and control time, they were ultimately at its mercy. It was a romantic notion, but let's face it, as useful as a chocolate teapot when it came to the practicalities of running a city-state. In truth, the ancients weren't just sitting around, serenading the stars about the nature of time. They were busy working out how to make the most of it, and that meant getting down to the nitty-gritty of timekeeping. The Greeks, for all their poeticism, understood that those philosophical musings needed backing by real-world action. They weren't just gazing dreamily at the heavens. They were calculating the length of the year to within a few minutes of our modern calendar. Not bad for folks without a calculator app. But let's not get too carried away romanticizing these ancient timekeepers. The myths added flavor, sure, but they also had practical implications. Take the Sothic cycle of the Egyptians, which we touched on earlier. This wasn't just about predicting floods. It was intertwined with their mythology of Osiris and the rebirth of the land. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, was linked to the annual flooding of the Nile, and by extension, the cyclical nature of time. These myths weren't just bedtime stories. They were societal glue, binding together religion, agriculture, and governance. And here's where the plot thickens. While myths like those of Kronos and Osiris were deeply ingrained in the fabric of society, they also served as tools of control. Priests and rulers wielded them to maintain their grip on power. If you could convince the masses that you had a direct line to the divine, like the priests of Ammon who claimed they could predict the Nile's behavior, you could pretty much write your own ticket. It was a bit like having the ultimate insider trading tip, but instead of stocks, you were betting on the river's rise. Now, let's stir the pot with another myth, this time from the Romans. Enter Janus, the two-faced god of beginnings and endings. This guy was the original multitasker, looking both to the past and the future, and he wasn't just a mythological figure. He was a symbol of how Romans viewed time. Janus was associated with doorways and transitions, and you can bet your last denarius that timekeeping was one of those transitions. The Romans even named the first month of the year, January, after him, a nod to the idea of new beginnings. But while Janus might have been a divine symbol of time's dual nature, the Romans were more interested in getting on with the business of living. Once again, reality bites back. While the Romans were busy erecting temples to Janus, they were also refining their calendar to ensure that the grain shipments and tax collections didn't go awry. The Julian calendar, as we've seen, was a masterpiece of reform that took Roman timekeeping from chaotic to clockwork. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. It took years to iron out the kinks, with leap years being mismanaged to the point where Augustus had to step in and fix the mess. It was like trying to fix a car by hitting it with a wrench until it started working, effective, but not pretty. The tales of gods like Kronos and Janus, as fascinating as they were, couldn't hold a candle to the gritty realities of ancient life. While the myths gave meaning to time, the day-to-day grind required precision and pragmatism. People needed to know when to plant crops, when to march armies, and when to celebrate festivals. The myths were a comforting backdrop, but the real action was happening on the ground, where farmers hoped the Nile would rise, and merchants prayed the sundial wasn't lying to them. So, here we are, knee-deep in the myths and realities of ancient timekeeping, and what have we learned? That while the stories were compelling, even awe-inspiring, they were often just that, stories. The real heroes were the unsung engineers and astronomers, the ones who took those myths and turned them into something tangible, something that could be used to actually run a civilization. They were the ones who looked at the stars, the sun, and the water and said, "We can use this." And use it they did, in ways that shaped the world for centuries to come. But hold onto your sundials, because we're not done yet. There's more to explore about how these myths and realities intertwined, and how they set the stage for the next chapter of human history. We're about to dive into how these ancient practices influenced the rise of empires and the fall of leaders. So stick around, because the clock is still ticking, and there's plenty more history to unravel. And so, with our feet still wet from wading through myth and reality, we step into the present, where ancient timekeeping systems have evolved into a world of digital wizardry. No more fixing your gaze on the heavens or listening to water drip interminably. Nope, now we've got timekeeping down to a science so precise it would make those ancient engineers blink in disbelief. But before we get too smug, let's take a moment to appreciate how those early systems laid the groundwork for the digital clocks that now dominate our lives. First, let's talk about how we got from sundials to microchips. The leap wasn't as direct as you might think. It began with mechanical clocks, which started ticking around the 14th century, courtesy of some clever monks who decided that prayer times needed a bit more punctuality than the sun could provide. These clocks were the ancestors of the pendulum clocks that followed in the 17th century, courtesy of one Christian Huygens. Huygens, a Dutch polymath, managed to improve timekeeping accuracy to within seconds per day, a quantum leap from the vague hours of sundials. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we hit the jackpot with quartz clocks. In 1927, Warren Marrison and J.W. Horton at Bell Telephone Laboratories created the first quartz clock. By exploiting the piezoelectric properties of quartz crystals, these clocks achieved a level of precision that would have left Roman engineers gobsmacked. Quartz clocks are accurate to about 15 seconds per month, a feat that no sundial or water clock could ever hope to match. And yet, the concept wasn't entirely foreign to the ancients. After all, they understood the importance of regular intervals, even if their methods were a bit more, shall we say, rustic. But let's not forget the piece de resistance in modern timekeeping, atomic clocks. These bad boys make quartz clocks look like sundials in comparison. First built in 1949 at the U.S. National Bureau of Standards, atomic clocks use the vibrations of cesium atoms to keep time with mind-boggling precision, accurate to 1 second in 100 million years. Talk about overkill, right? But this precision is vital for technologies we take for granted today, like GPS and internet synchronization. Without atomic clocks, your smartphone's map app will be about as reliable as asking for directions in a foreign language you don't speak. Now, here's the kicker. While we've got the tech side of timekeeping down to a science, our cultural obsession with time hasn't changed all that much since the days of sundials. We still live by the clock, albeit in a more frenetic and less celestial manner. The ancient Romans might have fretted about market days and military campaigns, but today we've got Zoom meetings that won't wait, deadlines that don't care about your snooze button, and time zones that can turn scheduling into a nightmare worthy of Ovid's pen. And yet, for all our technological prowess, the cultural legacy of ancient timekeeping persists. Take the idea of the work week, for example. The Romans had their nundinal cycle, the Greeks their agoras, and today we have the 5-day work week. It's a constant reminder that while we might think we're masters of time, we're still dancing to rhythms set in motion millennia ago. Our perception of time, shaped by these early systems, continues to dictate not just our work, but our very way of life. Let's not romanticize it too much, though. While it's tempting to look back at ancient timekeepers as noble pioneers, the reality was often more about survival and control than a love of horology. For them, time wasn't just a concept. It was a tool, a weapon, and occasionally a tyrant. And in a world where missing the right moment could mean the difference between feast and famine, you can bet that time mattered more than we might ever know. But what about the myths? Surely they must have left some mark on our modern perception of time. Absolutely. The stories of Kronos and Osiris, Janus and the Sarthic cycle, are more than just bedtime tales. They're part of a broader narrative that's influenced everything from literature to the way we celebrate New Year's Eve. Our cultural obsession with beginnings and endings, with the passage of time and the fear of its inexorable march, owes much to these ancient legends. In the end, the legacy of ancient timekeeping is a tapestry woven with threads of practicality, myth, and everything in between. It's a reminder that while we might have moved on from sundials and water clocks, the fundamental human quest to understand and master time remains unchanged. We might have traded Narmans for gadgets, but the questions remain the same. How do we make the most of the time we have? How do we balance the need to measure with the desire to live? So, as you glance at your digital clock, smartphone, or smartwatch, spare a thought for those early innovators who, with nothing but shadows and water, laid the foundation for our modern timekeeping marvels. They remind us that while technology evolves, human nature, and our obsession with time, remains as ancient as the pyramids themselves. And maybe, just maybe, next time you're rushing to meet a deadline, you'll think of those priests predicting the Nile's rise and smile, knowing that some things never change. In the bustling streets of 18th century Geneva, a city that was more of a political tinderbox than a serene lakeside retreat, young Jean-Jacques Rousseau was born on a crisp June day in 1712. Now, Geneva wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd expect to birth a revolutionary thinker. It was a city ruled not by kings, but by a bunch of wealthy merchants who fancied themselves the gatekeepers of Calvinist morality. These folks didn't just know how to make money. They knew how to keep everyone else from having too much fun, a skill that remains curiously common in boardrooms today. Rousseau's early life played out like a drama series. His mother died just 9 days after he was born, leaving him with a watchmaker father who, by all accounts, was more interested in the art of escapism than parenthood. This probably explains why, by the age of 10, Rousseau found himself abandoned and sent off to live with an uncle. His father, meanwhile, packed his bags and hoofed it to Constantinople after a dispute that involved, of all things, a duel. Yes, dueling was still a thing back then, proving that some people will do anything to avoid a PTA meeting. Geneva was a city of contradictions, much like Rousseau himself would become. On one hand, it was affluent and influential, thanks to a rising merchant class that was busy turning the wheels of capitalism. On the other hand, it was deeply divided. The Protestant Reformation had firmly planted its roots here, giving rise to a society that was equal parts industrious and puritanical. It's the kind of place where you'd find a Bible in one hand and a ledger in the other, where the only thing more impressive than the city's economic clout was its strict moral code. Rousseau was a product of this environment, a young man with a taste for books and an appetite for mischief. By the time he hit his teenage years, he'd already developed a penchant for wandering, a habit that would later lead him across Europe and into the annals of intellectual history. At 16, he left Geneva in what could be described as a fit of youthful rebellion, or perhaps just a really intense need to avoid cleaning his room. He roamed the roads of France, taking odd jobs and absorbing the world around him. It was here, in the unpredictable landscape of his own making, that Rousseau began to form the revolutionary ideas that would later shake the foundations of society. The world he left behind in Geneva was one of economic stratification and social tension. The Protestant work ethic had helped Geneva's merchants amass considerable wealth, but this new money class wasn't exactly in the business of sharing the spoils. Instead, they were busy reinforcing a social hierarchy that kept them at the top, and everyone else scrambling for the scraps. It's not hard to see why Rousseau, with his deep sense of justice and equality, would later rail against the inequalities of his time. His own life had been a first-hand lesson in the fickleness of fortune. As Rousseau wandered from town to town, his mind was a sponge, soaking up ideas and experiences. He worked as a tutor, a secretary, and even dabbled in music composition, an eclectic resume that would make any career counselor's head spin. But it was during these wanderings that he encountered the thinkers who would shape his philosophy. He met Madame de Werns, a well-off widow who became his mentor, and complicating matters in ways only 18th century life could, his lover. Their relationship was as educational as it was unconventional, and it exposed Rousseau to new ideas about society, religion, and human nature. In these formative years, Rousseau was a man caught between worlds, the rigid, rule-bound society of Geneva and the broader, more chaotic world beyond its borders. This duality would become a hallmark of his later work, as he sought to reconcile the individual's needs with those of the community. He was a thinker ahead of his time, yet very much a product of it, grappling with the tensions that defined his era. Meanwhile, back in Geneva, the city's economic and social dynamics continued to evolve. The rise of the merchant class had created new opportunities, but also new tensions. The city was a microcosm of the larger European struggle between tradition and progress, a place where the past and future jostled for supremacy. It's no wonder that Rousseau, with his keen sense of observation and knack for questioning the status quo, would later become one of the most influential critics of his age. So there you have it, a young Rousseau, shaped by abandonment, adventure, and a city that was as complex as the man himself would become. His early life was a roller coaster of experiences, each one adding a layer to the revolutionary ideas that were beginning to take shape in his mind. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of a journey that will lead Rousseau to challenge the very foundations of society and leave a legacy that continues to resonate today. And so, with a head full of dreams and a pocket full of lint, Rousseau made his way to Paris, the city that was less the city of light and more the city of enlightenment, or at least it was trying to be, in its own chaotic, caffeinated way. Paris, in the mid-18th century, was a hodgepodge of ideas, a bustling metropolis, where the only thing more plentiful than cobblestones were opinions. This was a place where the scent of revolution was as intoxicating as the aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans wafting from the city's legendary coffee houses. These establishments were the Twitter feeds of their time, noisy, crowded, and full of people who'd probably been better off keeping some thoughts to themselves. Rousseau, never one to shy away from an intellectual tango, dove headfirst into this world, mingling with Paris's philosophical creme de la creme. Picture him awkwardly navigating conversations with the likes of Denis Diderot, a man so dedicated to compiling human knowledge that he practically invented the modern encyclopedia. Diderot was like the Google of the Enlightenment, minus the search engine optimization. Then there was Voltaire, the sharp-tongued critic whose wit was so cutting it could have shaved a hedgehog. Voltaire once famously quipped, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," a sentiment that surely resonated with Rousseau, who was busy crafting ideas that would make even the most open-minded aristocrat choke on their croissant. But Rousseau wasn't just in Paris to rub elbows with the intellectual elite. He was here to make his mark. And make it he did, albeit in a way that would have made any PR manager reach for the aspirin. His first major intellectual success, the Discourse on the Arts and Sciences, was an essay that won him first prize in an essay contest held by the Academy of Dijon in 1750. This wasn't just a blue ribbon at the county fair. It was the philosophical equivalent of winning America's Got Talent. The essay, which argued that the progress of the arts and sciences had led to the corruption of virtue and morality, was a smack in the face to the Enlightenment itself, a bold move in a city full of Enlightenment champions. Now, you'd think that winning such a prestigious accolade would catapult Rousseau into the social stratosphere. But our man Jean-Jacques had a knack for stumbling just as he was about to soar. He had all the social grace of a bull in a china shop, and about as much patience for small talk as a cat at a dog show. While his peers were masters of the art of schmoozing, Rousseau was more likely to ask uncomfortable questions that made dinner parties feel like philosophical interrogations. Picture him, a veritable fish out of water, trying to swim in the shark-infested waters of Parisian salons, where the currency wasn't just wit, but also the ability to flatter without sucking up, or worse, appearing insincere. Rousseau, with his penchant for bluntness, was about as subtle as a marching band at a funeral. However, what he lacked in social finesse, he made up for in intellectual rigor. His discourse was a game-changer, shaking the very foundations of the Enlightenment's optimistic belief in progress. Rousseau argued, to the dismay of his contemporaries, that all this so-called progress might just be dressing up humanity's ethical decay. It was like telling a room full of tech moguls that their beloved gadgets were actually ruining human interaction. Yet, Rousseau's critique struck a chord, resonating with those who felt that the Enlightenment's promises were a little too rosy to be true. As he continued to navigate the Parisian intellectual scene, Rousseau's reputation as a Conquerian thinker grew. He was the guy who'd show up to a potluck and tell everyone their dishes were contributing to the moral decline of society. But beneath this veneer of controversy was a thinker grappling with profound questions about human nature and society's role in shaping it. While Voltaire and the philosophers championed reason and science as paths to human improvement, Rousseau questioned whether these paths might lead to a dead end of moral bankruptcy. In the midst of his intellectual pursuits, Rousseau was, quite characteristically, grappling with personal contradictions. Here was a man who extolled the virtues of simplicity and the natural state, yet was deeply embedded in the very fabric of the sophisticated Parisian society he often critiqued. His personal life, much like his philosophical work, was a study in contrasts. He lived in modest quarters, yet his ideas were anything but subdued. He was a recluse by nature, yet his thoughts were a public spectacle, dissected and debated in those very coffee houses where he often felt like an outsider. The economic backdrop of Paris at this time was equally complex. The city was a bubbling cauldron of wealth and poverty, where opulent palaces stood just a stone's throw from squalid tenements. The rising merchant class was busy expanding its influence, much like in Rousseau's native Geneva, but here the stakes were higher and the game more cutthroat. The disparity between the rich and the poor was glaring, and it was in this environment that Rousseau's ideas about inequality began to take shape. He saw firsthand the corrosive effects of wealth on human relationships, a theme that would later become central to his work. But let's not kid ourselves. Rousseau wasn't some saintly sage immune to the allure of city life. He had his vices and his foibles, his moments of doubt and despair. He was, after all, human, and it's in this humanity that we find the essence of his work. His inability to play the social game wasn't just a quirk. It was a reflection of his deeper struggle with the world around him. He was a man out of step with his time, yet profoundly in tune with the timeless questions that continue to haunt us. So, as Rousseau navigated the intellectual landscape of Paris, he was laying the groundwork for ideas that would challenge and inspire generations. His discourse on the arts and sciences was just the beginning, a clarion call to rethink the very fabric of society. And while his social faux pas might have made him the butt of a few jokes, his ideas were anything but laughable. They were revolutionary, and in a world teetering on the brink of change, they were exactly what was needed. Stay tuned, because Rousseau's journey is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as exhilarating. Rousseau's journey through the intellectual minefield of Paris was setting the stage for his most audacious moves yet. As he tiptoed through social gatherings with all the grace of a hippo in a tutu, his mind was churning out ideas that would soon turn the world on its head. Enter The Social Contract and Emile, two works that would make waves bigger than a tsunami in the Enlightenment's calm seas. Let's start with The Social Contract, published in 1762. This wasn't just a book. It was a philosophical grenade lobbed into the drawing rooms of Europe. Rousseau famously began with the line, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Talk about an opening that slaps you harder than a cold shower. In essence, Rousseau was saying that the natural state of humans was freedom, but society, with its rules and hierarchies, had shackled us. Not exactly the kind of sentiment that made him the darling of kings and queens, but it resonated with anyone who'd ever felt like a cog in the machine. Rousseau wasn't proposing anarchy, though. His idea of the general will suggested that true freedom came from aligning with the collective will of the people, a sort of early blueprint for democracy, where the common good trumped individual whims. It was a radical departure from the absolute monarchies of the time, where the will of one often outweighed the needs of the many. Picture a world where the peasants didn't just serve the king's whims, but had a say in governance. It was revolutionary stuff, and it scared the pants off the ruling elite. But wait, there's more. Rousseau didn't stop at political theory. In Emile, or On Education, also published in 1762, he tackled the education system with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He argued that education should nurture a child's natural instincts rather than stifle them with rote memorization. It was a revolutionary idea in an age where education resembled a factory assembly line more than a nurturing environment. If The Social Contract was a call to political arms, Emile was a manifesto for personal liberation. Rousseau was essentially saying, hey, maybe kids aren't just tiny adults who should be seen and not heard. Now, let's talk about the economic backdrop of Rousseau's life as he penned these groundbreaking works. By this point, Rousseau was no stranger to financial hardship. Despite his growing fame, he faced the kind of monetary woes that would have made Scrooge McDuck break into a cold sweat. In a time when patronage was the main source of income for intellectuals, Rousseau's knack for making powerful enemies meant he wasn't exactly rolling in dough. He lived on the edge, financially speaking, often relying on friends and admirers to keep him afloat. This financial instability was the backdrop against which he crafted ideas that questioned the very foundations of society. Rousseau's financial struggles weren't just a footnote in his life story. They were central to his philosophy. He experienced firsthand the precariousness that came with economic inequality, the very thing he railed against in his writings. His own life was a testament to the idea that the system was rigged, a notion that resonates all too well in today's gig economy, where job security is about as stable as a card house in a windstorm. But what about the myth of Rousseau as the solitary genius, toiling away in isolation? It's a romantic image, sure, but let's not kid ourselves. While Rousseau often embraced solitude, he was also very much a product of his social environment. He corresponded with other thinkers, debated ideas, and was influenced by the intellectual currents around him. The idea that he was some lone wolf howling into the intellectual abyss is about as accurate as saying the internet is a fad. He stood on the shoulders of giants while simultaneously kicking them in the shins. And yet, the appeal of Rousseau's myth endures. There's something undeniably compelling about the image of a man railing against the system, even as he navigates its complexities. It's the classic underdog story, a tale of one man against the world, armed with nothing but his ideas and a quill. It's easy to see why Rousseau continues to capture the imagination, even as we peel back the layers to reveal the messy, complicated reality of his life. Rousseau's revolutionary ideas weren't just academic exercises. They had real-world consequences. His works were banned in France and Geneva, and he was forced to flee, becoming an intellectual fugitive. Imagine writing something so provocative that it gets you kicked out of not one, but 2 countries. That's the kind of literary impact most authors only dream of or have nightmares about. Yet, despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, Rousseau's influence spread like wildfire. His ideas about democracy and education found fertile ground in revolutionary movements across the globe. The American founding fathers, for example, drew inspiration from Rousseau's notion of the general will when crafting their vision of a new nation. And while they might not have sent him a thank you note, the echoes of his philosophy can be found in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. In education, Rousseau's emphasis on nurturing a child's natural instincts paved the way for progressive education models that prioritize creativity and critical thinking over rote memorization. The man who once argued that children should be free to explore and learn at their own pace would find a kindred spirit in modern educational reformers who champion Montessori and other innovative approaches. Rousseau's influence is as alive as ever, even if his methods might make traditionalists twitch. The irony of Rousseau's legacy is that, while he critiqued the very society that celebrated him, his ideas became a cornerstone of the modern world. He was both a product of his time and a prophet for the future, a man whose contradictions were as numerous as his contributions. His life was a testament to the power of ideas to transcend the circumstances of their creation, to challenge the status quo, and to inspire generations to come. So as we leave Rousseau for now, remember that his story is far from over. His journey through the corridors of Enlightenment thought is just a chapter in a much larger narrative. Rousseau may have been a man out of step with his time, but his ideas marched on, reshaping the world in ways he could never have imagined. Stay tuned. There's more to come from this philosophical firebrand, and the next chapter promises to delve even deeper into the tumultuous world he helped to shape. Rousseau's journey through the ever-tumultuous corridors of Enlightenment thought was far from a leisurely stroll, more like a high-speed chase through a philosophical minefield. And just as his ideas seemed to be gaining traction, they also managed to ruffle more feathers than a fox in a henhouse. The backlash he faced was about as subtle as a cannonball at a tea party, and it was coming at him from all directions. Let's start with the church, which had the ecclesiastical equivalent of a conniption fit over Rousseau's works. See, Rousseau's ideas weren't just revolutionary, they were downright incendiary, especially to religious authorities who weren't exactly keen on having their apple cart upset. His Émile was immediately banned in Paris, and the Catholic Church, not known for its light touch with heresy, decided Rousseau's writings were about as welcome as a mouse at a cat convention. They denounced him, and in a time when being on the wrong side of the church could mean more than just a slap on the wrist, this was no small matter. But the church wasn't the only institution with its knickers in a twist. The state, too, had its share of grievances with Rousseau. His ideas about social contracts and the general will were perceived as a direct threat to the established order. Monarchs and ministers weren't exactly lining up to align themselves with a guy who suggested that power should derive from the people, not the throne. In 1762, both his social contract and Émile were condemned in Geneva, leading to arrest warrants that had Rousseau packing his bags faster than you can say philosophical exile. And so off he went, fleeing to Switzerland, a country known for its neutrality, and more importantly, its distance from the long arms of Parisian and Genevan authorities. Just imagine it. Rousseau, the man who wrote passionately about the harmony of the natural world, now embroiled in personal chaos, dodging authorities like a fugitive. It's like watching a nature documentary where the gentle deer suddenly has to run for its life. The irony wasn't lost on Rousseau, who must have felt that his own life was a contradiction of his theories on natural order. In Switzerland, Rousseau sought refuge in Modiers, a small village in the Principality of Neuchâtel, which was under Prussian rule at the time. Here, he sought a semblance of peace, but peace in Rousseau's life was as elusive as a unicorn at a rodeo. His arrival was anything but quiet. He was a celebrity, albeit one with a reputation that preceded him like a bad smell at a perfume convention. The villagers were suspicious of this foreign thinker with dangerous ideas, and it didn't take long before tensions simmered to a boil. True to form, Rousseau's stay in Modiers was marked by conflict. He eventually found himself on the receiving end of a stoning, a less than subtle hint that his welcome had worn out. This was more than just a case of small-town xenophobia. It was a testament to how his ideas, while revolutionary, were also deeply unsettling to those invested in maintaining the status quo. And so, once again, Rousseau was on the move, this time seeking asylum in England. England, with its penchant for tolerating eccentrics and rebels, as long as they didn't stir up too much trouble, seemed like a promising refuge. Enter David Hume, the Scottish philosopher who was as much a celebrity in intellectual circles as Rousseau. Hume offered Rousseau a place to stay, and for a while it looked like Rousseau might finally find the tranquility he so desperately sought. But as with most things in Rousseau's life, this was a fleeting illusion. The friendship between Rousseau and Hume began like a philosophical bromance, with mutual admiration and respect. Yet it quickly disintegrated into a saga that could rival any high school drama. The falling out was legendary, complete with accusations, paranoia, and enough backstabbing to fill a Shakespearean play. Rousseau, ever the sensitive soul, became convinced that Hume was part of a conspiracy against him. Hume, on the other hand, was bewildered by Rousseau's erratic behavior and perceived ingratitude. Their correspondence reads like a masterclass in misunderstanding, where every slight was magnified and every word dissected with the precision of a surgeon. The rift between Rousseau and Hume is a reminder that even great minds can succumb to pettiness and paranoia. It's almost comforting, in a way, to know that the great philosophical debates of the Enlightenment could devolve into something resembling a spat over who unfriended whom on social media. Their fallout was public and messy, splashed across letters and pamphlets that were devoured by an audience eager for intellectual gossip. It was a scandal that underscored the precarious nature of intellectual alliances and the human tendency to see shadows where there are none. In the midst of this chaos, Rousseau continued to write, his pen as sharp as ever. Despite the personal turmoil, his ideas remained focused on the pursuit of a society built on equality and freedom. But the irony of his situation was palpable. Here was a man who preached harmony, and yet found himself embroiled in discord, a prophet of peace whose own life was a testament to the chaos he sought to transcend. Rousseau's time in England was short-lived. In 1767, he returned to France under an assumed name, a poignant symbol of the exile who could neither return home nor find peace abroad. His journey through exile is a testament to the enduring power of ideas to unsettle and inspire, to provoke and challenge. Rousseau, through it all, remained a beacon of intellectual defiance, a philosopher whose legacy was forged in the fires of controversy and conflict. And so, as we leave Rousseau in this moment of personal and philosophical turmoil, remember that his story isn't over. The man who challenged the very foundations of society was still on his journey, navigating a world that both shunned and celebrated him. Stay with us, because the next chapter promises to delve deeper into the complex tapestry of Rousseau's life and the indelible mark he left on the world. Rousseau was back in France, albeit under an assumed name, like a literary James Bond, minus the gadgets and suave demeanor. He was a man weaving through the labyrinth of his own creation, with paranoia setting up camp in his mind. It was a time when being named Jean-Jacques Rousseau was about as safe as wearing a down with the king t-shirt at a royal banquet. Yet, despite the cloak and dagger lifestyle, Rousseau continued to write, his quill a weapon sharper than any sword. Fast forward to Rousseau's later years, and you find him battling not just external enemies, but also the phantoms of his own making. His paranoia had become a constant companion, as if he were living in a never-ending episode of Survivor, Enlightenment edition. He believed everyone was out to get him, which, given his track record, wasn't entirely off the mark. But there was a twist. Despite this tumultuous existence, Rousseau was laying the groundwork for an impact that would echo through the annals of history long after his death in 1778. Enter the French Revolution, stage left, with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. The revolution was a seismic shift that would change the face of France and beyond, and guess what? Rousseau's fingerprints were all over it. The revolutionaries were smitten with his ideas, particularly those about equality and the general will. Rousseau's thoughts gave intellectual ammunition to those looking to dismantle the old order. It's like handing a match to someone standing in a room full of dynamite, explosive and inevitable. But here's where it gets interesting. The French Revolution, while enamored with Rousseau's ideals, did what most revolutions do. It bent those ideas to fit its own narrative. Rousseau's vision of the general will was about collective decision-making for the common good. Revolutionary leaders, however, often interpreted it as my will equals the general will, leading to a few unfortunate chapters in history where heads rolled, literally. So, while Rousseau's ideas fueled the revolutionary fire, they also got a remix that would have left the philosopher himself scratching his head, or maybe reaching for a stiff drink. Now, let's debunk a myth that's as persistent as a mosquito at a summer picnic. The romanticized Rousseau as the unerring prophet of democracy. The man was brilliant, sure, but he was also as flawed as the rest of us. His personal life was a chaotic tapestry of contradictions. He preached about the virtues of family, yet sent his own children to an orphanage. He extolled the virtues of simple living while relying on the patronage of the upper class. It's like a modern-day minimalist who can't resist a Black Friday sale. Despite these contradictions, Rousseau's impact on political thought is indisputable. His ideas laid the intellectual groundwork for modern democracy, influencing not just the French, but also the American revolutionaries. You can thank Rousseau the next time you vote, or when you complain about the inefficiencies of government. Both are part of his legacy. His thoughts on education, too, have left a lasting mark, advocating for an approach that sees children as curious beings rather than empty vessels to be filled with facts. It's a sentiment that echoes in today's educational philosophies, from Montessori to progressive education models. But let's not forget the cost of being a trailblazer. Rousseau's life was a testament to the price of pioneering ideas that rattle the status quo. He was celebrated and vilified, a prophet and a pariah. His story is a reminder that those who dare to challenge the foundations of society often walk a lonely path, one fraught with danger and misunderstanding. It's a tale as old as time, the visionary ahead of his own era, struggling to find a place in it. In his final years, Rousseau found some semblance of peace, albeit the kind that comes from isolation rather than acceptance. He continued to write, his later works reflecting a man who had wrestled with the world and his own demons. He died at the age of 66, leaving behind a legacy as complex as the man himself. Rousseau was a thinker whose ideas planted seeds that would grow into the modern concepts of democracy and education. Yet, he was also a man whose life was a series of paradoxes, a reminder that the human condition is rarely neat or simple. As we wrap up this journey with Rousseau, it's worth reflecting on the dual nature of his legacy. He was both a product of his time and a shaper of the future. His ideas continue to challenge and inspire, testament to the enduring power of thought to transcend the constraints of time and circumstance. So the next time you engage in a spirited debate or question the system, remember Rousseau, the man who dared to ask the difficult questions, and in doing so, changed the world. And as you drift off to sleep, pondering the intricacies of Rousseau's life, take comfort in the knowledge that history, much like Rousseau himself, is a complex tapestry of contradictions and revelations. It's a tale that never truly ends, constantly evolving with each new generation that dares to question and reimagine the world anew. Sweet dreams, fellow seekers of knowledge. The Four Corners region of the American Southwest isn't just a place where you can stand in 4 states at once, playing Twister with geography. It's also where the story of the ancient Puebloans, those clever architects of ancient America, unfolds. So, let's dive into this saga where people swapped wandering for wall building and nomadism for neighborhoods around 750 AD. Now, these early settlers didn't just stumble into the Four Corners because they were following some ancient GPS blip. Nope, they were responding to a survival instinct as old as time. Find food, water, and a place to crash. And wasn't the Southwest just a peach of a spot, abundant in resources, and more importantly, a climate that didn't require thermal underwear? This was where these folks made a name for themselves, long before the Spanish even had a word for corn. Before they became the ancestral Puebloans, these people were part of the basket-maker cultures, a name that seems quaint until you realize baskets were the ancient equivalent of Amazon Prime, essential for carrying everything from food to family heirlooms. They started off as hunter-gatherers, chasing after game and gathering plants with the kind of persistence that would put even the most dedicated forager to shame. But then they hit upon a revolutionary idea. What if, instead of chasing dinner across miles of desert, they could grow it right where they lived? Boom, agriculture was in the house, and with it came the first baby steps towards settled life. By about 750 AD, these early Puebloans were saying goodbye to the nomadic life and hello to something more permanent. They started planting corn, beans, and squash, the 3 sisters of agriculture, if you will, right in their backyard. And here's a fun tidbit. Corn, that staple of their diet, was domesticated from a wild grass in southern Mexico around 9,000 years ago. It made its way north, transforming societies as it went, like some kind of ancient celebrity chef's special. But growing food wasn't the only trick up their sleeves. Once they had a steady food supply, they could settle down and start thinking about the bigger picture, like how to organize themselves so they didn't all end up bickering about who got the sunniest spot for their squash patch. Enter social organization. With their newfound stability, these ancient folks began to develop complex societal structures, organizing themselves into clans and villages. Their leaders weren't likely to have been the kind you'd find in a Game of Thrones episode. No iron thrones or dragons, but they were vital in keeping everyone on the same page and making sure the community thrived. As they settled further, the architectural game of the ancestral Puebloans leveled up. We're not just talking about a few mud huts here. These people built structures that could give today's architects a run for their money. They constructed pit houses initially, cozy little dwellings dug into the ground, which were great for staying cool when the desert temps were cranked up to oven. But as their skills evolved, so did their homes. They moved on to above-ground structures, using stone and adobe, a precursor to the magnificent cliff dwellings that would later become their signature move. Now, let's debunk a common myth. These ancient builders weren't just randomly stacking stones and hoping for the best. Their construction was precise and purposeful. They aligned many of their buildings with solar and lunar events, kind of like a prehistoric calendar app, but with more stone and less silicon. One can imagine the discussions around these projects involved a lot less arguing about cost overruns and a lot more about aligning with the solstice. And let's not forget the social glue that held these communities together. Trade was a big deal. They weren't living in isolation, hoarding their corn and pottery. Instead, they were part of a vast trade network that stretched across the Southwest. Turquoise from New Mexico, shells from the Pacific, and even macaws from Central America, all these found their way into Puebloan hands. This wasn't just trade for the sake of stuff. It was about forming connections, sharing ideas, and enhancing status. Think of it as the ancient version of networking, but with fewer business cards and more feathers. So, what does all this tell us? The transition from a nomadic lifestyle to complex societies wasn't just a fluke. It was a calculated move that required innovation, collaboration, and a bit of architectural flair. The ancestral Puebloans weren't just surviving in the harsh desert climate. They were thriving, laying down the foundations, literally and figuratively, for the remarkable cultures that would follow. And as we wrap up this first act in the saga of the ancestral Puebloans, it's clear they weren't just putting down roots. They were setting the stage for one of the most fascinating chapters in the history of the American Southwest, proving that with a little creativity and a whole lot of determination, even the harshest landscapes can become a canvas for human ingenuity. Stay tuned, because this architectural odyssey is just getting started. As the curtain rises on the second act of our architectural odyssey, let's zero in on those iconic cliff dwellings that have captured imaginations and Instagram feeds alike. These stunning structures, nestled high in the rugged cliffs of the American Southwest, are a testament to the ancestral Puebloans' knack for engineering and a blatant disregard for vertigo. Imagine having your morning coffee with a view that would make a real estate agent swoon. No wonder these ancient architects are still the talk of the town. Over 1,000 years later, the ancestral Puebloans weren't just building houses. They were crafting a legacy in stone. Their most famous address, Cliff Palace in Mesa Verde National Park, which dates back to the late 12th century. With around 150 rooms and 23 kivas, those circular, subterranean rooms used for religious rituals, Cliff Palace was less a humble abode and more a sprawling condo complex. And all of this was done without the help of cranes, cement trucks, or hard hats. Talk about DIY skills. But let's pause for a reality check. While it's easy to romanticize these cliffside condos as serenely nestled retreats, the truth is they were born out of necessity, not whimsy. The ancestral Puebloans were responding to environmental challenges, like drought and resource scarcity, by moving their communities into these more defensible and sustainable locations. In other words, they weren't just after killer views, they were after survival. The sandstone cliffs provided natural insulation, keeping the dwellings cool in summer and warm in winter, which is pretty impressive when your thermostat options are limited to none. Let's debunk another common misconception: the idea that these structures were the exclusive domain of a peaceful, idyllic society. While the ancestral Puebloans were indeed master builders, they were also human, with all the usual quirks and conflicts. Evidence suggests that these communities weren't just architectural marvels, but also fortresses, designed to keep out less-than-friendly visitors. You see, even back then, people were keen on real estate in prime locations, and disputes over resources were as common as they are today. Speaking of resources, the materials used in these constructions were a masterclass in local sourcing. Sandstone blocks, mud mortar, and wooden beams were transported from the surrounding environment to build these multi-story stone buildings. And when I say transported, I mean hauled by hand. No Amazon Prime delivery here. This was sustainability before it was a buzzword, driven by the simple fact that there were no other options. Every stone was chiseled, shaped, and placed with precision, a testament to the careful planning and community effort behind these monumental projects. Now, before we start imagining these ancient engineers as primitive stonemasons with nothing better to do, let's consider the social and political context. Constructing such massive structures required sophisticated organization and cooperation. It wasn't just about stacking stones. It was about coordinating labor, managing resources, and maintaining social harmony amidst the pressure cooker of ancient communal life. The ability to bring people together for these projects speaks to the leadership and social cohesion within these communities. Remarkable, given they didn't have the luxury of signing contracts or calling in consultants. But back to those cliff dwellings. Their strategic locations offered not just stunning panoramas, but also protection from the elements and potential invaders. The ancestral Puebloans could control access to their homes using ladders that could be pulled up in times of danger, a nifty security feature long before the advent of alarm systems. It's like the ancient equivalent of a gated community, where the gates were literal cliffs, and the residents had a bird's-eye view of who was coming for dinner, and whether they brought their own corn. And let's not overlook the community aspect of these dwellings. They weren't just individual homes scattered across the landscape. They were tightly knit hubs of social and cultural activity. The kivas, those intriguing circular rooms, played a central role in community life, serving as ceremonial spaces for gatherings and rituals. These were the heart of the community, where stories were shared, dances were performed, and the spiritual life of the Puebloans was nurtured. It's a reminder that even in the harshest environments, humans have always sought connection, meaning, and a sense of belonging. As we marvel at the engineering prowess of the ancestral Puebloans, it's important to remember that these were practical people, not just dreamers with a penchant for stonework. Their innovations in architecture were driven by the need to adapt, survive, and thrive in a challenging landscape. They didn't just build homes, they built societies, leaving behind a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. So, as we wrap up this segment of our story, let's hold onto that sense of awe and appreciation for the ingenuity and resilience of the ancestral Puebloans. They weren't just crafting buildings, they were crafting history, one stone at a time. And as we continue this journey, remember, the story of these ancient architects is far from over. There are still layers to uncover, myths to debunk, and insights to glean from their remarkable achievements. Stay tuned, because we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating tale. As we continue our archaeological journey, let's pivot from the stone-crafted heights of the ancestral Puebloans' architectural genius to the bustling economic networks that crisscross the Southwest like ancient highways. You see, these folks weren't just building homes in the cliffs. They were also weaving an intricate web of trade that connected diverse communities across the region. And yes, this was long before the invention of the wheel made logistics a breeze. So, what did the ancestral Puebloans trade? Well, if you thought turquoise was just for your aunt's favorite necklace, think again. This blue-green gem was the superstar of the Puebloan trade scene, sourced from mines in present-day New Mexico and Arizona. It wasn't just bling, though. Turquoise was a status symbol, a currency of its own kind, and a cultural connector. Those stones were like the ancient equivalent of blue-chip stocks, valuable and in high demand. But it wasn't all about gemstones. The ancestral Puebloans were also master artisans, crafting pottery that would make any modern ceramist weep with envy. Their parts weren't just for storing grain or water. They were canvases, telling stories with designs that danced around the clay. These ceramics became hot commodities in the trade networks, prized for their beauty and utility. Think of them as the ancient Southwest's answer to Tupperware. Functional, yes, but also a statement piece. And let's not forget textiles. The Puebloans' woven goods were both practical and decorative, showcasing intricate designs that highlighted their makers' skill and creativity. These textiles were more than just clothes. They were symbols of cultural identity and trade goods that could travel far and wide, carrying with them the stories of their creators. In a world without Instagram, textiles were a medium through which communities could express themselves and connect with others. Now, let's tackle the myth that these trade networks were just friendly bartering exchanges. While the notion of idyllic, Cumbaya-style trading circles is charming, reality was a bit more cutthroat. Trade was serious business, driven by necessity and competition. You didn't just trade turquoise for a part and call it a day. You navigated complex relationships, negotiated hard bargains, and balanced the demands of supply and demand. These trade networks were the lifeblood of the economy, a sophisticated system that required skill and diplomacy. The sheer geographical spread of these trade routes is staggering. Goods traveled hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles across deserts, mountains, and rivers. For instance, macaw feathers from Central America made their way into Puebloan hands, adding a splash of exotic color to their lives and ceremonies. Imagine the logistics involved in transporting a living macaw through the arid Southwest without the convenience of a pet carrier. It's a testament to the determination and ingenuity of these ancient traders. This vast network wasn't only about material goods, it was about ideas and technology too. The exchange of knowledge, be it agricultural practices, construction techniques, or spiritual beliefs, was as valuable as any turquoise necklace. The ancestral Puebloans and their trade partners were part of a dynamic cultural dialogue, a flow of information and innovation that enriched the societies involved. It's a stark reminder that globalization isn't just a modern phenomenon. It's been a driving force of human progress for millennia. Of course, the economics of trade also had significant social implications. Communities involved in these networks could achieve a level of prosperity and influence that isolated groups couldn't match. Trade expanded social connections and helped to reinforce alliances, but it also created disparities. Those who controlled the trade routes or the production of highly desired goods could amass power and wealth, leading to social stratification. It's the age-old story. Where there's trade, there's hierarchy. But let's not gloss over the challenges. The climate of the Southwest was as unpredictable then as it is now, with droughts and food shortages always lurking around the corner. The ability to trade for food and other necessities was crucial to survival during lean times. It was like having a safety net, albeit one that required a fair bit of maintenance and negotiation. And what about the role of politics? Trade networks weren't just economic engines, they were political tools. Alliances could be forged or broken based on trade relationships, and leaders often used these networks to bolster their power and influence. In a way, trade was the original game of power, a chessboard where goods and services were the pieces, and survival was the ultimate checkmate. Yet, despite the complexities and challenges, trade was a testament to human resilience and adaptability. The ancestral Puebloans showed an incredible capacity to not only survive, but thrive in their harsh environment by leveraging the power of trade. They weren't just participants in a regional economy. They were innovators, entrepreneurs, and cultural ambassadors, crafting a legacy of connection and exchange that resonates through history. As we wrap up this chapter of the Puebloan saga, let's hold on to the notion that these ancient traders weren't just exchanging goods. They were weaving the fabric of society, one trade at a time. Their networks were the veins through which the lifeblood of culture and commerce flowed, sustaining communities and shaping the world around them. And as we continue our exploration of their remarkable story, remember, the threads of their legacy are still woven into the tapestry of the American Southwest today. So stay tuned, because this journey through ancient trade is far from over. There are more mysteries to unravel and more insights to uncover, one trade route at a time. So, as we continue weaving through the cultural tapestry of the ancestral Puebloans, let's pull back the curtain on their societal and political structures. Spoiler alert, it's not all sunshine and ceremonial dances. The Puebloans were masters at more than just masonry. They knew a thing or two about running a community. And no, it didn't involve a utopian council of peace-loving sages. First up, let's talk leadership. Unlike the kings and queens you might find lounging on thrones in medieval Europe, the Puebloan leaders had a different gig. They were more like communal coordinators than autocratic rulers. These leaders were often chosen based on wisdom, experience, and maybe a knack for knowing when to plant corn without consulting a weather app. Leadership was fluid and often rotated among clan heads, ensuring the power didn't concentrate like a black hole, sucking everything into its orbit. No one wanted a dictator, especially when community cohesion was the name of the survival game. Speaking of survival, the political structure of the Puebloans was a bit like a well-organized potluck. Everyone contributed, and everyone had a stake in the outcome. It was a blend of egalitarian ideals and practical considerations. Decisions were made collectively, often in council settings, with input from various clan leaders. It was like ancient democracy minus the filibuster. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Consensus didn't mean harmony. Disagreements were as common as a desert sunrise, and sometimes the debates got as heated as the midday sun. Now, onto the spiritual and political heart of the Puebloan world, the kiva. These circular, subterranean rooms were the Swiss army knives of communal spaces. They weren't just for spiritual rituals, they were multifunctional hubs of activity. Imagine a kiva as a blend of a church, town hall, and community center all rolled into one, with a dash of secret society intrigue. Kivas were where the magic happened, literally and metaphorically. They were the venues for religious ceremonies, community meetings, and maybe the odd strategy session on how to outsmart the neighboring village in the next trade negotiation. Before we paint the Kivas as the ultimate community utopia, let's sprinkle in some reality. While Kivas were central to Puebloan life, they were also exclusive. Not everyone got a front row seat to the spiritual or political action. Access was often restricted to those in the know, or those who'd earned their stripes within the community. It was like the VIP section of ancient society, where the chosen few decided the fate of the many. So, while Kivas were centers of communal activities, they were also symbols of power and exclusivity. Let's tackle the myth of Puebloan society as some kind of ancient Shangri-La. Yes, they were incredibly advanced and cooperative, but they were also human. And humans have a knack for making things complicated. Conflicts arose over resources, land, and sometimes just because someone didn't like their neighbor's pottery design. The notion that the ancestral Puebloans lived in perfect harmony is as much a fairy tale as unicorns grazing in the desert. But don't let that tarnish the romance entirely. The ancestral Puebloans' ability to maintain social cohesion in a harsh environment is nothing short of remarkable. They managed to build not just homes, but thriving communities, where the sum was greater than its parts. It was a delicate balance of cooperation and conflict, tradition and innovation, a testament to the complexity of human society. And let's not forget the rituals. These were more than just spiritual exercises. They were social glue, binding communities together through shared beliefs and practices. Rituals often marked significant events, like the changing of seasons or successful harvests. They were the original social media, broadcasting messages of unity and continuity to everyone involved. Participating in these rituals was as much about reinforcing social bonds as it was about appeasing the divine. But let's keep our skeptic hats on. While rituals were undoubtedly important, they could also be tools of control. Leaders used them to reinforce social hierarchies and maintain their status within the community. It was a subtle dance of power, where the divine and the mundane intertwined. So, while the rituals were spiritual spectacles, they were also carefully choreographed performances designed to keep everyone in their place. As we unravel the threads of Puebloan society, it's clear that they were adept at navigating the complexities of communal life. Their societal structures were as carefully constructed as their cliff dwellings, resilient, adaptable, and occasionally fortified against the chaos of the outside world. They understood that survival in the desert wasn't just about building walls. It was about building relationships, both within and beyond their communities. So, as we draw this segment to a close, remember that the ancestral Puebloans were more than just architects of stone. They were architects of society. Their legacy is a reminder that even in the most challenging landscapes, humans have an incredible capacity for innovation, adaptation, and community building. But don't go anywhere just yet. There's still more to uncover in this ancient saga, more myths to debunk, and more lessons to learn from these remarkable people. Stay tuned, because we're not done exploring the depths of Puebloan history. As we delve deeper into the narrative of the ancestral Puebloans, it's time to shift our gaze from the heights of their societal achievements to the shadows of their decline. Around 1300 AD, these once thriving communities began to unravel, leaving behind more questions than answers. So, what went wrong? Was it a Game of Thrones-style power struggle, or did Mother Nature decide to play a cruel joke? Let's unpack the possible culprits. First up, climate change, the ultimate plot twist in history's soap opera. The American Southwest is a place of extremes, where the weather can be as unpredictable as a cat on catnip. From about 1275 to 1300 AD, the region experienced a mega-drought. Think of it as the Great Depression of the climate world. Tree ring data tells us, because trees apparently have better memories than most of us, that this prolonged dry spell was no ordinary drought. It was a grab-your-hat, we're heading to the Dust Bowl kind of situation. Crops withered, water sources dried up, and suddenly those picturesque cliff dwellings weren't nearly as inviting as they used to be. But before you blame everything on the weather, let's talk resources. The ancestral Puebloans were nothing if not resourceful, but even the best-laid plans can falter when nature decides to tighten the purse strings. Over time, Their settlements had grown to the point where they were outstripping the local resources. Farming on marginal lands, deforestation for fuel and construction, and overhunting all took their toll. It's the age-old story. You can't squeeze blood from a stone, and you can't expect the land to give what it doesn't have. As resources dwindled, so did the Puebloans' ability to sustain their communities. Then there's the social upheaval card, because why have one disaster when you can have a trifecta? Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that as resources became scarce, social tensions bubbled over. Imagine trying to host a potluck when everyone forgot to bring a dish. That's the kind of pressure we're talking about. There are signs of increased conflict, with fortified sites and evidence of violent encounters. When survival is at stake, even the most harmonious communities can fracture under the strain. This wasn't a peaceful transition to greener pastures. It was more like a desperate dash to anywhere that promised a better future. And yet, here's the kicker. Despite these challenges, the ancestral Puebloans didn't just vanish into thin air. They migrated, blending with other cultures and adapting to new environments. The Hopi, Zuni, and other Pueblo peoples today are their descendants, carrying forward the legacy of their ancestors. It's a testament to the resilience of human spirit and culture. Even as their world changed, the Puebloans adapted, proving that survival often means knowing when to fold them and move on. Now, let's debunk the romantic notion that their disappearance was some mystical vanishing act. The truth is less mysterious, but no less poignant. The ancestral Puebloans were a part of a dynamic world, responding to environmental pressures, resource limitations, and social challenges with the tools they had. They didn't disappear. They transformed, evolving into the vibrant cultures we recognize today. Modern interpretations of ancestral Puebloan culture often oscillate between two extremes, the noble lost civilization and the tragic victims of circumstance. But the reality is more nuanced. These were complex societies, capable of incredible achievements and faced with insurmountable challenges. Their story is not just one of decline, but of resilience and adaptation. They left behind a legacy that continues to inspire and inform, a reminder that the past is never as far away as it seems. Archaeologists continue to unearth new insights, challenging our understanding and adding layers to this intricate narrative. Each discovery is like a puzzle piece, revealing more about how the ancestral Puebloans lived, adapted, and ultimately how they endured. It's a humbling reminder that history is a living, breathing entity, constantly reshaped by new evidence and interpretations. As we wrap up this saga of the ancestral Puebloans, let's not forget their enduring impact. Their architectural genius, social organization, and cultural innovations were not just survival strategies. They were expressions of a vibrant and dynamic civilization. They remind us that even in the harshest conditions, humanity has an extraordinary capacity for creativity and resilience. So next time you marvel at the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde or the intricate pottery that once graced their tables, remember the people behind them, their struggles, triumphs, and the indelible mark they left on history. They weren't just builders of stone, they were builders of culture, and their story is far from over. It's a tale that continues to unfold, holding lessons for us all as we navigate our own challenges in a world that, like theirs, is ever-changing. As the dust settles on this chapter of history, the legacy of the ancestral Puebloans stands as a testament to the resilience and adaptability that define the human experience. In the bustling chaos of 11th century Europe, a young man named William emerged from the fray, not unlike a medieval rock star with a penchant for conquest and a bit of a temper. Born around 1028 in Falaise, Normandy, William's entrance into the world was already a scandalous affair. His father, Robert the Magnificent, apparently took the magnificent part to heart when he fathered William with Herleva, the daughter of a local tanner. Not exactly the royal bloodline one might expect for a future king, but hey, every great saga starts with a twist. Growing up as the Duke of Normandy, from the tender age of 8, after his dad conveniently died on a pilgrimage, young William was thrust into a political snake pit where backstabbing was an Olympic sport. This wasn't your typical Game of Thrones. It was the real deal. The duchy was a hotbed of intrigue, with nobles eyeing the young duke like vultures circling a wounded animal. Yet, William wasn't one to be picked apart easily. He quickly learned that in a world where loyalty was as rare as a unicorn, brutal decisiveness was his best friend. Before he reached adulthood, he had survived multiple assassination attempts and rebellions, an impressive resume for any teenager. William's reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. By the time he was in his early 20s, he had already squashed a rebellion at the Battle of Valsdunes in 1047 with a mix of strategic genius and sheer force. It was here that he cemented his reputation as a leader who knew how to get things done, even if it meant getting his hands dirty. His relentless grip on Normandy was a testament to his ability to navigate the treacherous political waters of the time, and he wasn't shy about using force to keep potential usurpers at bay. Yet, the political landscape of 11th century Europe was more tangled than a bowl of spaghetti. Alliances were as fleeting as autumn leaves, and enmities as enduring as stone. William's marriage to Matilda of Flanders in 1051 was a strategic masterstroke, solidifying his ties with one of the most powerful regions in northern Europe. This union wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a calculated move that bolstered his position and expanded his influence. Matilda, by the way, was no shrinking violet herself. She was intelligent, politically savvy, and not afraid to wield her influence, making her the perfect partner in crime. Now, let's address the elephant in the medieval room, the English throne, an alluring prize that William had his eyes set on. The death of Edward the Confessor in January 1066, without a direct heir, turned England into the ultimate game of musical chairs, and William was not about to miss out on a chance to claim a seat. The English crown was up for grabs, and the competition was fierce. Harold Godwinson, the most powerful noble in England, was crowned king, but William had a trick up his sleeve. He claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, a claim as dubious as a politician's promise, yet one that William was determined to enforce. The stage was set for the Norman Conquest, a chapter in history that would see William earn his moniker, the Conqueror. But before crossing the English Channel, William had to ensure his back was covered. He secured the support of the Pope, a move that wasn't just a religious blessing, but a political coup de grace. With the Pope's endorsement in hand, William rallied his Norman knights by promising them land and riches in England. A tempting offer when you consider that land meant power and wealth, the medieval version of a winning lottery ticket. William's rise to power was a masterclass in medieval statecraft and military prowess. His ability to forge alliances, crush dissent, and wield power with an iron fist made him a formidable player in the Game of Thrones, long before George R.R. Martin ever put pen to paper. As he prepared to launch his ambitious campaign across the Channel, the world watched, knowing that whatever came next would reshape the landscape of England forever. The Norman Conquest was not just about a battle for a crown. It was a seismic shift in the political, social, and cultural fabric of medieval Europe. But that's a story for another night. For now, rest easy knowing that William, with all his flaws and ferocity, was about to make history in a way that would be remembered for centuries to come. With the Pope's blessing tucked neatly in his pocket, like a divine hall pass, William was ready to make his next move. But let's not kid ourselves. Crossing the English Channel wasn't just a matter of packing a suitcase and booking a ferry. No, this was a logistical nightmare that would make any modern-day project manager break out in a cold sweat. Imagine coordinating an entire Norman army, complete with horses, weapons, and provisions, to float across a notoriously temperamental stretch of water. It was like planning a medieval D-Day. William's first task was assembling a fleet, and we're not talking a few wooden rafts here. This was a full-on maritime armada, constructed to carry thousands of men and their gear. The fleet consisted of approximately 700 ships, a flotilla so vast that it could blot out the sun on a good day. Building these vessels didn't come cheap, and financing them was akin to crowdfunding your way to the moon. In medieval currency, the cost was a staggering affair. Estimates suggest that the entire operation would have set William back around 10,000 pounds of silver, a king's ransom, quite literally. In today's money, we're talking millions, folks. Imagine the GoFundMe campaign. Help Big Willie conquer England. Rewards include a slice of the English countryside. The economic implications were significant. William had to call in favors, extract taxes, and promise future riches like a 1066 version of a startup founder pitching to venture capitalists. The allure of English land was a potent carrot, and William dangled it effectively, convincing knights and barons to part with their hard-earned cash and support his audacious campaign. As if that wasn't enough, there was the small matter of keeping his soldiers from turning on him. These weren't your average 9-to-5ers. They were professional warriors accustomed to plunder and spoils. Waiting around for the weather to clear and the winds to shift was not their idea of a good time. Tensions simmered as days turned into weeks. Picture a bunch of heavily armed men, bored out of their minds, stuck in a medieval version of a hotel lobby. It's a miracle they didn't start a brawl right there on the shores of Normandy. William knew that leadership was about more than just issuing orders. It was about maintaining morale. So, he used a blend of charisma and intimidation to keep his troops in line, throwing in promises of glory and wealth for good measure. The soldiers were itching for action, and William's assurances were the only thing standing between them and all-out mutiny. Then came the break they'd been waiting for, a favorable wind in late September 1066. William seized the moment with the kind of decisiveness that had become his trademark. The fleet set sail, and the channel crossing began. It was a journey fraught with danger, but William's luck held, and they landed unscathed on the shores of Pevensey on September 28. Talk about sticking the landing. Now, if you think the English were caught napping, you'd be right. Harold Godwinson, the newly crowned king, had just finished dealing with another invasion up north by Harold Hardrada of Norway. It was like playing whack-a-mole for poor Harold, with invaders popping up all over the place. Exhausted, Harold marched his men south to confront this new threat. The stage was set for the Battle of Hastings, a clash that would decide the fate of England. William's strategy was as meticulous as it was ruthless. He divided his forces into 3 groups: archers at the front, infantry in the middle, and cavalry at the rear. This layered approach was designed to wear down the English forces through attrition, a sort of medieval meat grinder that relied on endurance as much as skill. And then there's the infamous arrow in King Harold's eye, a moment immortalized in the Bayeux tapestry like a gruesome centerpiece. Whether the arrow actually struck Harold in the eye or not is debated among historians. It may have been a later embellishment, the kind of detail that makes for a better story. Because let's face it, King gets hit in the eye with an arrow is way more compelling than King gets knocked off his horse. The battle itself was a brutal, bloody affair. William's troops executed feigned retreats to lure the English into breaking ranks, a classic tactic that turned the tide in favor of the Normans. The chaos and carnage of the battlefield were staggering, with thousands of men fighting tooth and nail for supremacy. When the dust finally settled, William stood victorious. Harold was dead, whether by arrow, sword, or some other grim fate, and the English forces were in disarray. William had not just claimed a crown, he had reshaped the future of England. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The conquest was far from over, and the path to consolidation would be as treacherous as the climb to power. Stay tuned, because the tale of William's reign is just getting started. As the dust of the Battle of Hastings settled, William the Conqueror, now more than just a catchy nickname, faced the Herculean task of transforming his battlefield triumph into a stable reign. Spoiler alert, this wasn't going to be a walk in the medieval park. The English throne might have been his, but ruling a land of fiercely independent nobles with a penchant for rebellion was a different beast altogether. Enter the post-Hastings hustle, where William had to pull off the political equivalent of juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. The immediate aftermath saw him march his troops to London with the calculated swagger of a man who just won the ultimate game of risk. London, the heart of England's wealth and power, was the prize he needed to solidify his victory. But London's not a city that just rolls over. No, it hesitated, possibly hoping for a miracle, or at least a better offer. But William's combination of military muscle and strategic negotiation eventually brought the city to heel. By Christmas Day 1066, William was crowned king at Westminster Abbey, a move that wasn't just ceremonial, but a power play to ensure his legitimacy. It might have been festive in name, but let's not kid ourselves. This was a coronation underscored by tension and distrust. Contemporary accounts tell us that when the crowd acclaimed William, the Norman guards outside mistook the cheers for a riot. and responded by setting fire to nearby buildings. Talk about a heart reception. With the crown firmly on his head, William embarked on the next phase of his conquest, consolidation of power. And here's where things get really interesting. If the battle was the hard-hitting action sequence, the consolidation was the political thriller, complete with intrigue, betrayal, and a touch of medieval administrative flair. William knew that to hold on to England, he needed more than just military might. He needed control over the land and its people. This brings us to one of William's most audacious projects, the Domesday Book. Now, if you think filling out your tax return is a nightmare, imagine being part of the first ever national audit. Commissioned in 1085, the Domesday Book was essentially a giant census, a meticulous record of who owned what and how much it was worth. Think of it as the medieval spreadsheet from hell, prototype of bureaucratic efficiency or inefficiency, depending on your perspective. The Domesday Book catalogued over 13,000 settlements across England, detailing land holdings, resources, and even livestock. It was a tool for taxation, control, and a not-so-subtle reminder to the English that William was the boss. So why the name Domesday? It's not exactly warm and fuzzy. The term was derived from the Old English dam, meaning judgment, and it was meant to convey the finality of its findings. Like the Day of Judgment, there was no appealing its conclusions. In a land where property and power were inseparable, the Domesday Book was William's way of saying, I own this place, and here's the evidence. But let's not get swept away by the administrative genius of it all. The Domesday Book also laid bare the economic realities of the Norman conquest. The redistribution of land from Anglo-Saxon to Norman hands was as swift as it was ruthless. By 1086, a mere 20 years after Hastings, over half of the land in England was in the hands of about 200 Norman lords. Talk about a hostile takeover. Yet, for all the talk of records and redistribution, William's rule was far from peaceful. England wasn't going to sit quietly under Norman rule, and revolts were as frequent as medieval feasts. The north of England, in particular, was a hotbed of resistance, and in 1069, William faced a serious uprising in the region. His response, the harrying of the north, a campaign of scorched earth that would make even the most ruthless of rulers blanch. This wasn't some romanticized tale of a benevolent king bringing peace and prosperity. William's suppression of rebellion was brutal. Chroniclers like Orderic Vitalis paint a grim picture, with villages razed and crops destroyed, leading to widespread famine and suffering. The land was left bereft of inhabitants, wrote Vitalis, a stark reminder that William's consolidation of power was as much about fear as it was about governance. So, was William the magnanimous ruler some legends suggest? Hardly. His reign was marked by a relentless pursuit of control, often at the expense of those who dared to challenge him. Yet, despite the brutality, there was an undeniable method to his madness. By the end of his reign, William had not only secured his grip on England, but had also laid the foundations for a centralized government that would influence the future of the British Isles. In dissecting William's legacy, it's clear that the image of a noble conqueror is as much a myth as the notion of a chivalrous knight. His rule was a complex tapestry of ambition, ruthlessness, and a touch of administrative brilliance. While the Domesday Book stands as a testament to his organizational prowess, the scars of his conquests remind us of the harsh realities of power. As we leave William to his machinations, remember that the story of the Norman conquest is far from over. The ripples of his reign would extend beyond his lifetime, shaping the course of English history in ways that even the conqueror himself might not have foreseen. But that's a tale for another time, as we delve deeper into the legacy of a ruler who changed the face of a nation. Stay tuned as the saga continues, because with William, it's never just history. It's a drama of epic proportions. And as we peel back another layer of William's reign, we see a man who wasn't just content with reorganizing land and people. Oh no, he had cultural ambitions too. William's impact on English society was like a tornado in a teacup, sweeping in Norman customs, language, and that oh-so-charming feudal system. Let's dive into this cultural cocktail and see what it meant for the average medieval Joe. First up, the Norman culture. Think of it as the medieval version of a cultural exchange program, except nobody signed up for it. French became the language of the ruling class, the courts, and the elite. If you were an Anglo-Saxon trying to climb the social ladder, suddenly mastering phrases like oui, man c'est nous became as crucial as knowing when to duck during a joust. But let's not romanticize this linguistic shift too much. For the everyday English peasant, it was less bonjour and more, what on earth are they saying? William's introduction of the feudal system was a seismic shift in societal structure. Forget your modern 9-to-5. This was a hierarchical pyramid where everyone owed service to someone above them, right up to the king himself. It was like a medieval multi-level marketing scheme, but instead of selling essential oils, you were trading land for military service. A knight's duty wasn't just to swing a sword, it was to protect the land granted to him by his liege lord, a relationship bound by oaths that were as sacred as a pinky swear in a playground. Now, let's talk about William's architectural ambitions. The Tower of London, an iconic structure that stood as both a royal palace and a looming symbol of Norman dominance. Construction began in 1078, and this wasn't your typical DIY project. We're talking a fortress that would make any castle enthusiast swoon, complete with a keep that soared some 90 feet into the London sky. But here's where the romance ends and reality kicks in. Building the Tower of London was an economic and logistical nightmare. Stone was hauled from Keene in France, a task of Herculean proportions given the absence of cranes or forklifts. The cost, likely astronomical, though exact figures are lost to time. And let's not forget the labor force. No construction unions or safety regulations here. The workers probably toiled in conditions that would make a Dickensian factory look like a day spa. Imagine chiseling stone in the freezing rain, with little more than a promise of meager pay and maybe a bowl of gruel at the end of the day. These grand constructions were more than just architectural marvels. They were statements of power. The White Tower was a constant reminder of William's presence, a stone-clad memo to the English that the Normans were here to stay. And while we might admire its beauty today, let's not forget the blood, sweat, and calloused hands that went into its creation. The economic implications of these projects were massive. Funding them required squeezing taxes from an already beleaguered populace. The Norman aristocracy might have been living it up in their new stone fortresses, but the peasants footing the bill were likely less enthused. It's a stark reminder that while history often glorifies the conquerors, the reality was far grittier for the conquered. As we marvel at these medieval marvels, it's crucial to remember that behind every grand structure is a story of toil and turmoil. The Tower of London wasn't just a palace. It was a fortress built on the backs of labourers who had little choice but to comply. It's a reality check that tempers the romanticized view of medieval architecture with a dose of cold, hard truth. With William's reign came not just a new ruler, but a new order. The introduction of the feudal system and the Norman culture reshaped English society in ways that echoed through the centuries. Yet, for all the grandeur and innovation, the harsh realities of medieval life were never far from the surface. The Norman Conquest was a transformative era, but it was also one marked by upheaval and hardship. As we leave this chapter of William's legacy, it's clear that his impact was as enduring as it was controversial. His reign laid the groundwork for future monarchs, but it was built on the struggles and sacrifices of many. And while the story of William the Conqueror is filled with tales of bravery and brilliance, it's also a reminder of the complexities and contradictions of history, a saga that's far from over. There's more to uncover, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel this fascinating period. Now, let's dive into perhaps the juiciest tidbit about William's legacy, the long-term effects of his conquest, which were kind of like a medieval version of dropping a cultural and legal bomb on England. Think of it as a Norman remix of Anglo-Saxon society, complete with a new legal system, linguistic shifts, and a cultural overhaul that left an indelible mark on the British Isles. Starting with the legal system, William's influence was nothing short of revolutionary. He didn't just conquer physically, he wanted to conquer legally too. Under his rule, the foundation of English common law began to take shape, though not intentionally, mind you, as William was more interested in securing control than setting up a law school. Nevertheless, the introduction of Norman legal practices blended with existing Anglo-Saxon customs, creating a unique hybrid that would evolve into the common law system we recognize today. In particular, the idea of trial by jury and the emphasis on common customs over written codes were innovations that would echo through the centuries. So next time you're called up for jury duty, you can thank William and his Norman crew for the privilege. And what about the language, you ask? Oh, it was like throwing a French soufflé into an English stew. Old English, the language spoken by the Anglo-Saxons, was a Germanic tongue, full of hard consonants and direct speech. Enter Norman French, with its flair and fancy vowels, and you get Middle English, a linguistic love child that would eventually evolve into modern English. This wasn't just a casual affair. It was more like a forced marriage where French vocabulary was thrust into the English lexicon. Words related to law, government, art, and even food came from Norman French. So, the next time you're enjoying beef instead of cow, or pork instead of pig, remember you're savoring the linguistic legacy of the Norman conquest. Culturally, William's impact was a mixed bag of assimilation and dominance. The Normans brought with them architectural styles, religious reforms, and even a new sense of identity. Cathedrals and castles sprung up in the Romanesque style, with thick walls and rounded arches that were as much about defense as they were about aesthetics. The church was reorganized, aligning more closely with continental practices, which led to reforms in monastic life and clerical appointments. This ecclesiastical shake-up wasn't just about piety. It was about power, with William ensuring that the church was firmly under his thumb. But let's be real, this cultural conquest wasn't a one-way street. The English didn't just roll over and play dead. Over time, the two cultures intermingled, leading to a unique Anglo-Norman society. Marriages between Norman nobles and Anglo-Saxon women were a political strategy and a necessity, creating a new aristocracy that was distinctly English. This blending of cultures set the stage for England's future, creating a society that was neither entirely Norman nor Anglo-Saxon, but something new altogether. Now, let's shift gears to the end of William's life, a tale that veers into the realm of the absurd. The Conqueror's death in 1087 was as dramatic as his life. After a campaign in France where he laid siege to the town of Mantes, William was injured when his horse reared, causing him to fall and suffer fatal internal injuries. As if his life wasn't already a testament to the chaos of medieval politics, his deathbed scene was a study in human nature's less noble qualities. His sons squabbled over his inheritance, Robert Curthose inheriting Normandy and William Rufus getting England, while poor Henry was left with a chest of silver. If that sounds like a raw deal, it was. Yet the real kicker came at his funeral, an affair that can only be described as a medieval comedy of errors. The church where William was to be buried wasn't even finished, and when they finally got around to interring him, a fire broke out in the town, scattering mourners in all directions. To add insult to injury, when they attempted to place his rather corpulent body in the stone sarcophagus, it turned out to be too small. Let's just say the results weren't pretty, and the stench reportedly filled the church. If you're picturing a Monty Python sketch, you're not far off. It's a reminder that even the grandest of conquerors can end up as a punchline to history's dark humor. In the end, how do we remember William the Conqueror? As a complex figure who reshaped England in his image, yet whose legacy was as fraught with contradiction as it was with achievement. He was a man who wielded power with ruthless efficiency, yet his reign was marked by both progress and pain. The Norman conquest wasn't just a historical event. It was a transformation that left a lasting imprint on every aspect of British life. As we wrap up this saga, it's worth reflecting on the duality of William's legacy. On one hand, he brought about change that laid the foundations for modern Britain. On the other, his methods were often brutal, reminding us that history's heroes are rarely as noble as the legends suggest. And so, William's tale ends not with a regal flourish, but with an unvarnished truth, that every conqueror, no matter how great, is ultimately at the mercy of time's relentless march. And as history continues to unfold, we remember William not just as the conqueror, but as a symbol of the relentless human pursuit of power and its inevitable costs. In 618 AD, when the Western world was still figuring out the pointy end of a quill, China was busy setting the stage for one of history's most dazzling cultural revivals, the Tang Dynasty. Hu Emperor Geazu, a man whose actual name, Lai Yuan, sounds suspiciously like someone your parents might have tried to set you up with. This guy was more than just a footnote in a dusty scroll. He was the founder of the Dynasty, but let's not pretend he sprang fully formed from the historical mist like some ancient superhero. The reality, his rise to power was more Game of Thrones than fairy tale. Ieyasu seized power in a classic coup, revolting against the Sui dynasty, which had impressively managed to run itself into the ground through over-ambitious construction projects and reckless military campaigns. Think of the Sui as that friend who keeps trying to build their own furniture and ends up with an apartment full of wobbly chairs. But back to Ieyasu. His ascent to the throne wasn't just a matter of personal ambition. It was a response to a nation that was, frankly, tired of the Sui's nonsense. It's a bit like taking over a group project because the last leader just couldn't stop gluing their fingers together. Once in power, Emperor Ieyasu didn't waste time, rolled up his sleeves, and tackled the administrative mess left behind. His focus, a tax system that wouldn't have modern accountants waking up in cold sweats. The Tang's approach was surprisingly straightforward for its time, relying on a system known as the equal field system. This was a kind of agrarian socialism that distributed land based on the number of mouths you had to feed, not unlike how parents divide up pizza slices at a kid's party. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and it kept the wheels of the economy greased without turning everyone into serfs. Then there were the administrative reforms. This was where Ieyasu showed he wasn't just a conqueror, but a builder of nations. He restructured the bureaucracy, creating a three-tiered system of government with departments handling everything from rights to public works. It's like he took one look at the Sui's chaotic governance and said, "We need a float chart here, people." The Tang administration was as efficient as a well-oiled machine, a metaphor that, coincidentally, they helped invent. But let's not get carried away with romanticizing Ieyasu's reign. The Tang dynasty didn't leap onto the historical stage in a blaze of glory. It stumbled in, tripping over its own robes, with a mix of trial, error, and a healthy dose of swordplay. The early days were fraught with power struggles and rebellions. Even Ieyasu himself eventually got the boot, ousted by his own son, Lai Shimin, who would take the throne as Emperor Taizong. Talk about awkward family dinners. The myths of the Tang dynasty's glittering start are purely that, myths. The reality was a gritty, often brutal struggle for power. Yet it's precisely this struggle that laid the foundations for what would become one of China's most culturally rich periods. The Tang wasn't born in a golden haze of cultural enlightenment. It was forged in the fires of political upheaval and social reform. And while the museum brochures might gloss over the messy bits, it's these very complexities that make the Tang story so compelling. The dynasty's origins are a testament to resilience and ingenuity in the face of chaos, setting the stage for a cultural renaissance that would echo through the ages. So, with the Tang dynasty's rocky start behind us, let's fast forward to the bustling heart of this empire, Chang'an. Now, this city wasn't just the capital. It was the beating heart of a cultural and economic renaissance that could make even the most jaded hipster swoon. But don't let the romantic image of a peaceful, harmonious melting pot fool you. Chang'an was more like the world's most chaotic potluck, with everyone bringing their own culinary chaos to the table. Picture a city teeming with over 1 million souls, a metropolis larger than any contemporary European city, where every street corner buzzed with the hum of trade. Chang'an was a place where you could buy silks so fine they'd make Versace weep, alongside spices so aromatic they'd knock the socks off any medieval chef. The Silk Road was the artery that pumped life into this urban giant, stretching over 4,000 miles and linking China to the Mediterranean. This wasn't just a highway of goods, it was a superhighway of ideas, religions, and cultures. The Silk Road was the medieval equivalent of a Twitter feed, but with fewer trolls and more camels. The city's grid layout was a masterpiece of urban planning. Think of it like a massive game of Tetris, with each district a perfect block slotted into the city's grand design. Residential areas were neatly divided from commercial ones, and the imperial palace sat like a crown jewel at the center, radiating power and authority. Of course, this organized facade belied a deeper chaos, a constant ebb and flow of citizens, traders, and foreigners that made Chang'an a true cosmopolitan hub. Now, about that multicultural mix. Imagine a city where you could hear Persian merchants haggling in the markets, Indian monks debating Buddhist doctrine, and Turkic soldiers swapping stories over cups of sake. In Chang'an, cultural fusion was as everyday as the morning kanji. However, the notion of a peaceful melting pot is, frankly, a bit of a fairy tale. Cultures didn't just blend seamlessly like a smoothie, they clashed and jostled like ingredients in a hot pot, sometimes delicious, sometimes explosive. Sure, there was cultural exchange, but let's not pretend everyone held hands and sang Kumbaya. The Tang dynasty's openness to foreign influences was as much about pragmatism as it was about enlightenment. They were smart enough to know that embracing different cultures could give them an edge, whether in trade, technology, or military tactics. Yet this wasn't always a smooth ride. There were tensions and conflicts, and at times the city felt more like a pressure cooker than a cultural utopia. Take religion, for example. The Tang era saw Buddhism flourish, but it wasn't the only game in town. Nestorian Christians, Zoroastrians, and Muslims all set up shop in Chang'an, each carving out their own niche. This religious diversity was both a source of strength and tension. The state patronized Buddhism, yet emperors were wary of its influence. It's a bit like having a favorite child you're slightly suspicious of, loving them, but keeping one eye open for any shenanigans. And let's talk about the economy. The Tang's economic engine was fueled by the Silk Road, which brought in luxury goods and exotic items like lapis lazuli and frankincense. But this wasn't just about shiny trinkets. The trade routes also carried agricultural advancements and technological innovations, like paper-making techniques that would eventually revolutionize the world. The Tang economy was like a finely tuned orchestra, with each section, agriculture, industry, commerce, playing its part in harmony. Yet, like any orchestra, it was vulnerable to discord, with political strife and natural disasters threatening to throw the whole symphony out of tune. The era's prosperity was built on a foundation of hard labor and strategic alliances. The Tang government lavished attention on infrastructure, investing in roads and canals to ensure goods flowed smoothly across the land. These projects weren't just for show, they were vital for the dynasty's survival. A well-maintained road network meant armies could mobilize quickly and trade could flourish. It was a savvy move, ensuring the empire didn't collapse under its own weight like a poorly assembled IKEA shelf. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life in Chang'an wasn't all silk pajamas and poetry readings. The city was a microcosm of the challenges and contradictions of the Tang dynasty itself. Behind the vibrant markets and dazzling cultural displays lurked poverty and inequality. The elite lived in opulent splendor, while the lower classes toiled to keep the city's wheels turning. The Tang's legendary cultural renaissance was as much about who got to join the party as it was about the party itself. The reality is, Chang'an was a city of contrasts, a place where the extraordinary and the mundane coexisted in a delicate dance. It was a city that showcased the heights of human achievement while also revealing the depths of societal challenges. The Tang dynasty story, with all its grandeur and grit, was still unfolding, leaving us with a tantalizing glimpse of what was yet to come. But let's save that for the next chapter, shall we? As the curtain rises on this next act of the Tang dynasty's grand production, we find ourselves knee-deep in an artistic renaissance that would make even the most avant-garde art enthusiast swoon. Forget the tired trope of starving artists. Tang creatives were more like rock stars with a penchant for ink and clay. At the center of this cultural maelstrom were the poets Lai Bai and Du Fu, whose verses flowed like the finest vintage wine. These guys were the Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of their time, capturing the hearts and minds of their audience with every stroke of the brush. Lai Bai, known colloquially as the immortal poet, was the kind of guy who'd probably attend a party just to liven it up with impromptu stanzas. His work, full of romantic imagery and a dash of whimsy, was the perfect antidote to the era's political dramas. Imagine him as the ultimate escapist, crafting worlds where moonbeams danced on rivers and heroic figures roamed the land. Lai Bai's poetry wasn't just entertainment, it was an emotional lifeline for folks tired of the grind. Sure, not every line was a masterpiece, but his ability to weave magic with words was undeniable. Meanwhile, Du Fu played the role of the era's conscience. If Lai Bai was the dreamer, Du Fu was the realist, capturing the grit and grime of daily life with an unflinching pen. His poems were less about ethereal beauty and more about the harsh realities of war, famine, and social injustice. Think of him as the Bob Dylan of the Tang era, using verse to shine a light on the issues that the ruling class might have preferred to sweep under the proverbial rug. While Lai Bai was off serenading the moon, Du Fu was getting his hands dirty in the messy business of truth-telling. Together, these two created a dynamic duo that encapsulated the Tang's cultural spirit. But let's not get too misty-eyed over their legacy. Not every poem from their prolific output was a hit, and some of their contemporaries churned out verses that were about as inspiring as a tax return. For every masterpiece, there were plenty of mediocre attempts, proving that even in a golden age, not everything that glitters is gold. And it wasn't just poetry that was having a moment. Painting and pottery were also in the spotlight, with artists pushing the boundaries of their mediums like rebellious teenagers defying curfew. Tang painters developed new techniques that emphasized naturalism and expression, creating works that captured the subtleties of human emotion and the grandeur of the natural world. Their pieces were as likely to be found in the humble homes of the literati as in the opulent halls of the elite. It's said that a single Tang painting could be worth its weight in gold, and considering some of these canvases were larger than life, that's saying something. Pottery, too, was undergoing a transformation. Tang artisans perfected the art of creating tricolored glazed ceramics, known as sankai, which became the must-have accessory for any self-respecting noble household. These pieces weren't just eye candy. They were status symbols, as essential to a Tang noble's home as a vintage record collection is to a modern hipster's apartment. The vibrant yellows, greens, and blues of sankai brought a splash of color to the everyday, making even the most mundane dinner feel like a royal banquet. But let's pivot from the arts to a force that shaped the Tang era in more ways than one: Buddhism. This wasn't your average Sunday school affair. Buddhism was a spiritual juggernaut, weaving its way into the very fabric of Tang society. It wasn't just a path for personal enlightenment. It was also a political tool wielded by emperors and ministers alike. The Tang rulers were savvy operators, recognizing the power of Buddhism to unify the diverse cultures within their empire. They supported the construction of temples and monasteries, creating a network of spiritual centers that rivaled the administrative prowess of the state. Yet, as with all things Tang, the relationship between the state and Buddhism was complex. On one hand, the religion offered solace and guidance to millions, but on the other, it posed a threat to imperial authority. The government's patronage was often a balancing act, weighing the benefits of spiritual support against the potential for religious leaders to amass too much influence. This wasn't just a philosophical dilemma. It was a real-world conundrum with political implications. Take the monk Xuanzang, for instance. His epic journey to India to retrieve sacred texts was the stuff of legend, inspiring countless stories and even a hit TV series centuries later. Xuanzang's odyssey wasn't just a spiritual quest. It was a diplomatic mission, earning him the favor of the emperor and a place in the annals of history. His return brought not only new religious insights, but also a stronger bond between China and its southern neighbors, demonstrating the savvy interplay between faith and politics. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. The Tang embrace of Buddhism was not without its critics, who saw the burgeoning number of monasteries as a drain on resources and a potential source of dissent. The state's support of Buddhism was as much a tactical maneuver as it was a genuine embrace of spiritual values, a dance of power that kept everyone on their toes. As we stand on the brink of the Tang's cultural and spiritual zenith, it's clear that this era wasn't just about pretty poems and painted landscapes. It was a time of vibrant creativity, yes, but also of strategic maneuvering and societal tension. The Tang dynasty was a masterclass in the art of balance, weaving together disparate threads to create a tapestry as complex as it was beautiful. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into this historical tapestry, remember that the story of the Tang isn't just about the art. It's about the artists, the patrons, and the politics that shaped their world. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more twists and turns in this epic saga. As we unravel the tapestry of the Tang dynasty, one thread glints with the sort of intrigue that could make a soap opera look like a documentary: the reign of Empress Wu Zetian. Now, this wasn't just any ruler. She was the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own name, and she didn't get there by playing nice. Let's dive into the tumultuous waters of her rule, a saga filled with innovation, ambition, and more than a few sharp elbows at the court. Born Wu Zhao in 624 AD, she entered the imperial court as a concubine to Emperor Taizong. After his death, she did what any ambitious woman would do in a patriarchal society. She maneuvered herself into the affections of his successor, Emperor Gaozong. By 655 AD, she climbed the ranks to become his empress. Talk about a career trajectory that would make even the most hardened corporate ladder climber blush. But Wu wasn't content with just being the power behind the throne. She wanted the throne itself, and through a series of calculated moves that would make Machiavelli proud, she got it. After Gaozong's death, she declared herself emperor in 690 AD. That's right, emperor, not empress. She didn't bother with semantics when it came to power titles. Once she had the imperial seal, Wu Zetian set about reshaping the Tang dynasty with a blend of reform and ruthlessness. On the reform side, Wu was a savvy innovator. She revamped the imperial examination system, a move that was both progressive and shrewd. By broadening the pool of officials, she not only opened up the bureaucracy to talent from all walks of life, but also created a base of support that was loyal to her. It's like she rewrote the rulebook for recruiting, long before LinkedIn was a twinkle in Silicon Valley's eye. Her reign also saw significant advancements in agriculture and trade. Wu knew that a full stomach made for a happy populace, so she promoted agricultural techniques that increased yields. These innovations kept the dynasty's coffers full, ensuring that the empire could afford both grand projects and the occasional military campaign. And let's not forget the arts. Wu was a patron of culture, encouraging the creation of Buddhist art and literature that would leave a lasting legacy. But with great power comes the temptation to wield it like a sledgehammer, and Wu was no stranger to political purges. She wasn't afraid to, let's say, retire her critics in a manner that involved more than just a gold watch and a farewell cake. Her reign was marked by a ruthless streak that saw many of her opponents disappear, sometimes literally. Even in an era accustomed to palace intrigue, Wu's methods were a cut above, both figuratively and sometimes quite literally. Now, let's fast forward to the 8th century for a dose of political drama that really shook things up, the Enlightenment Rebellion. If Wu Zetian's reign was a masterclass in controlled chaos, this rebellion was the historical equivalent of throwing a Molotov cocktail into an already heated situation. Enlightenment, a general of Turkic origin, was initially a favorite in the Tang court, which tells you all you need to know about the perils of playing favorites with ambitious military leaders. In 755 AD, Enlightenment declared himself emperor, effectively splitting the Tang dynasty in two. His rebellion wasn't just a little skirmish in the annals of history. It was a seismic event that altered the course of the dynasty. At its height, Enlightenment controlled a swath of territory that included the capital, Luoyang, and threatened Chang'an itself. The rebellion lasted nearly 8 years and was finally quashed in 763 AD, but not before inflicting a catastrophic toll on the empire. The numbers tell the harsh story. Millions dead, cities laid to waste, and an economy that was left reeling like a prizefighter after a 10-round bout. The rebellion exposed the deep fissures in the Tang administration, highlighting the dangers of over-reliance on military commanders who might have their own lofty ambitions. Enlightenment's revolt wasn't just about power. It was a stark indicator of the social and political tensions brewing beneath the empire's polished veneer. And let's not forget the economic dimension. The rebellion disrupted trade routes, including the all-important Silk Road, and drained the imperial treasury faster than a gambler at a rigged poker table. The aftershocks were felt for decades as the dynasty struggled to regain its footing. Taxes were increased, military spending ballooned, and the once stable agrarian base began to crumble under the weight of increased levies and conscription. The aftermath of the rebellion also saw a shift in the relationship between the central government and regional powers. To quell the rebellion, the Tang court had granted military governors, or jidashi, significant autonomy. It was a classic case of giving too much power to local authorities, who, once the dust settled, were reluctant to hand it back. This decentralization would haunt the Tang dynasty, eroding the central authority and setting the stage for future conflicts. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were tales of resilience and survival. The rebellion ushered in a wave of poetic and artistic expression that sought to make sense of the turmoil. It was during this period that Du Fu penned some of his most poignant works, capturing the human cost of war with a clarity that resonates even today. His poetry offered solace and reflection, a reminder of the enduring spirit of those who weathered the storm. The Anlushan rebellion may have revealed the cracks in the Tang dynasty's grand facade, but it also underscored the resilience of its people. As we stand on the precipice of the dynasty's next chapter, it's clear that this period of intrigue and upheaval was as much about human endurance as it was about power and politics. The Tang story is far from over, and the next act promises to be just as compelling as the last. Stay tuned, because the drama of history has a few more twists up its sleeve. As the dust settled from the Anlushan rebellion, the Tang dynasty found itself in desperate need of a metaphorical band-aid. But what it got instead was a series of unfortunate events that would make Lemony Snicket nod in approval. The post-rebellion era was a hot mess of economic strains, political blunders, and regional power struggles that would eventually unravel the once mighty Tang tapestry by 907 AD. Let's kick things off with the economy, the shaky foundation upon which this ancient empire teetered. The rebellion had left the treasury more depleted than a college student's bank account after a weekend in Vegas. To fix this, the Tang dynasty tried the ever-popular medieval solution: more taxes. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Raising taxes only alienated the peasantry, who were already feeling the pinch of increased levies and conscription demands. Think of it as trying to inflate a flat tire with a bicycle pump, feudal and mildly frustrating. Meanwhile, the Silk Road, that glittering artery of trade, was more clogged than a heart surgeon's worst nightmare. Banditry was on the rise, and regional warlords, those pesky jidashi, had grown too accustomed to their newfound autonomy. They were like teenagers with the keys to Dad's car, unwilling to give up their joyride. This decentralization of power meant that the central government, the supposed engine of stability, was sputtering on half a cylinder. The Tang court had about as much control over the provinces as a cat herder at a feline convention. Politically, the dynasty was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Infighting at court was the order of the day, with eunuchs wielding more power than some emperors. These eunuchs, who had started as mere gatekeepers, were now kingmakers, playing the Game of Thrones with a ruthless efficiency that would make even Littlefinger blush. By the time the last Tang emperor, Ai of Tang, took the throne, he was more of a puppet than a potentate, with eunuchs pulling the strings like a bad marionette show. And then there was Huang Kao, a salt merchant-turned-rebel leader who decided to throw his hat into the chaotic ring. In 875 AD, he launched a rebellion that spread like wildfire, eventually capturing Chang'an in 880 AD. Imagine the capital, once the bustling heart of the empire, now a ghost town in the grip of looters and arsonists. Huang Kao's rebellion was the final nail in the Tang's ornate coffin, showcasing the dynasty's inability to maintain order within its own borders. Collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907 AD wasn't a dramatic Shakespearean finale with tragic heroes and eloquent soliloquies. It was more like watching a slow-motion train wreck, painful, inevitable, and devoid of any redeeming heroics. When Zhu Wen, a former rebel general, declared himself emperor and established the later Liang dynasty, it was less of a triumphant takeover and more of a hostile corporate merger, leaving the Tang legacy in the dust. Yet, let's not close the book on the Tang without acknowledging the echoes of its cultural renaissance that still reverberate today. Despite its messy end, the Tang dynasty left a legacy that outlasted its political structures. Consider the era's artistic achievements. Tang poetry remains a touchstone of classical Chinese literature, with Lai Bai and Du Fu still celebrated as literary giants. Their works continue to be studied and revered, a testament to the enduring power of the written word. In the realm of art, Tang innovations in pottery and painting set standards that influenced generations. The Sankai ceramics, with their vibrant hues, became a symbol of Tang craftsmanship, while the dynasty's paintings, with their naturalistic style, laid the groundwork for future artistic explorations. Even Buddhism, which waxed and waned with the fortunes of the state, left an indelible mark on Chinese spirituality and culture, with temples and teachings that continue to inspire. The Tang's contributions to governance, such as the civil service examination system, laid the foundation for meritocratic principles that would shape Chinese bureaucracy for centuries. While the system was far from perfect, it offered a glimpse of a world where talent could triumph over birthright, a revolutionary idea for its time. So, as we wrap up this saga, let's debunk the idea that every dynasty ends with a dramatic curtain call. The Tang dynasty's decline was more of a gradual fade-out, a slow dissolution of power and influence. Yet, its cultural renaissance remains a beacon, illuminating the enduring impact of innovation and creativity. As we stand on the shoulders of this historical giant, it's clear that the Tang's true legacy isn't just in its political triumphs or failures, but in the rich tapestry of culture it wove, a tapestry that continues to inspire and inform the world today.